Wait, a thought.
Uh-huh.
The term pigeonhole, like being pigeonholed, was Greer Garson
Sure.
and Walter Pigeon the
Surely
reason
not.
for that?
I mean,
I don't know.
I think you can make the argument. I would like to see the conspiracy theory PowerPoint for that, please.
Okay, I'll put something together by tomorrow. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Lights, Camera, Accolade, the podcast where we watch every Best Picture nominee and winner in chronological order because much like Madame Curie in her titular movie this year, we underestimated how long such an experiment would take. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Abby.
And today we're back to discuss the 16th year of the Oscars, which celebrates movies released in 1943. So, fun fact, this was the first Oscars ceremony held at Grauman's Chinese Theater, so it was open to the public for the first time. Yeah, so that was probably super exciting, especially during wartime. But most importantly, this was the last year until 2009 to have 10 nominations for Best Picture. So we're going down to 5. So excited. Listeners, you're going to miss out on double the content, I guess, but it's going to be great for everyone. You know, hopefully better movies, because I feel like a lot of these, honestly, are just like they needed representation from every studio. So they were just throwing some in there.
I don't know. Let's put the Mickey Rooney one in.
Yes. Which we will get to. But first, to set the scene. So what was going on in 1943? Much like last time, the war is continuing, but the tides are turning against the German war machine. And a lot of that is happening in the Eastern Front. In February, the Battle of Stalingrad ended with Nazi Germany suffering a pretty huge defeat. And in July, there was kind of another decisive moment on the Eastern Front at the Battle of Kursk, which was the largest tank battle in history. And that was Germany, like a big offensive launch by them, hoping to regain control of the Eastern Front. But Soviet forces by that point were so deeply entrenched and prepared that they absorbed the attack and pushed back. So by the end of the battle, Germany pretty much lost their ability to mount major offenses in the Eastern Front. So that's a huge Allied victory there. The same summer, the Allies opened a new front in Europe by invading Sicily. And pretty much within weeks, Mussolini was overthrown. So by September, Italy had surrendered, but German forces moved in to maintain control, but Italy effectively was taken out of the war. And then across in the Pacific front, the U.S. was pressing forward with what's called their island hopping campaign, which is exactly what it sounds like. It was a strategy of bypassing fortified Japanese positions to get strategically valuable islands on the way through the Pacific to Japan.
So kind of like opposite Wake Island.
Yes, opposite Wake Island, potentially, you know, having learned something from that. But even that campaign and trying to be strategic with it, they suffered heavy casualties, which revealed how difficult it was actually going to be to take those steps towards Japan. Because I don't know if y'all know, Pacific, gigantic. And meanwhile, in Germany, so the Holocaust at this point has essentially reached full strength. The transportation of Jewish people to extermination camps in Poland is at its peak between last year and this year. I did find out that there was an uprising in the Warsaw Ghetto at this time in April, which was the largest single revolt by Jewish people against Nazis during World War II. Jewish resistance essentially were opposing the Nazis' final effort to transport the remaining population to the extermination camps. They knew that the Nazis' plan was to do that on the eve of Passover, which I feel like was, totally intentional, just a slap in the face. But the Jewish people in that ghetto were sparsely armed with weapons that had been smuggled into the ghetto by resistance fighters. And while it was technically, quote unquote, unsuccessful in that the remaining people were eventually transported into those extermination camps, their main goal was, of course, just to take a stand. And it actually lasted almost a month, which did force, Nazi Germany to have to send additional troops in and stuff. And it's kind of one of those things where it's like, well, who knows what dominoes that might have helped in other ways, right? As they're kind of fighting a war on multiple fronts.
Yeah.
And then back in the US, so war effort is operating at full capacity. American factories are in overdrive, producing ships and planes and weapons at never before seen levels, which I know we've said this a couple episodes, but finally pulled the country out of the Great Depression for real this time.
Hey, we made it.
We made it, but
at what cost?
Exactly. Yeah, at what cost? And in the country itself, there was rationing at this point too. So daily life was shaped by that kind of like sacrifice, limit your consumption to support the war effort as much as possible. So there were tensions erupting at this point. Most notably, there was the Detroit race riot, which was instigated by pretty much workers for defense plants having crazy competition for housing and employment in that area. And we talked about a couple episodes ago that government jobs were desegregated during this time, but segregation and bigotry persisted in, of course, other workplaces and in housing specifically. So a lot of white residents resisted that integration, and it continued exposing those deep racial divisions beneath the surface of wartime unity. So there was still a lot of tension at home. Also notably, the Zoot Suit riots happened in LA this year, which predominantly affected Latino, Filipino, African American youth who were targeted for violence because their suits were considered unpatriotic because they used a ton of fabric, which sounds like an excuse to me. I always thought they looked cool, but more importantly, they held significant identity meaning to young, often impoverished wearers. But, society at this time was really pushing sensibility, conformity, and sacrifice for war efforts. So
kind of the easy thing to latch into, right?
Exactly. Especially because, again, it was mostly youth that were targeted by this. So it's just like...
You're mad at a teenager for wearing a big coat.
Literally. So that was pretty much what was going on. But meanwhile, in Hollywood, I feel like this year, weirdly enough, there is that sort of patriotism and heroism that we're seeing in movies, but escapism kind of came back in equal measure. And important to remember that these movies were being aired overseas as well to servicemen. So they were meant to celebrate not only the war efforts and patriotism, but just to lift their spirits. So we'll see some of the more kind of fun movies in this year as well, even though the majority of them, I do think, focus still on the greater good and selflessness.
And you see that on a couple of them. I don't know if you saw them on your, whatever print you watched, but there's a few where explicitly there's a card at the end of the movie that's like, this movie was screened for our troops overseas. So there's a couple of those where it's very obvious that some of these are being taken overseas and used as that morale booster kind of tool.
Yeah, which I think is just so interesting to see. I saw, I think, at least one print that had that, and then one or two that had, of course, the like, by the way, buy war bonds, to support the effort. I was like, man, what an interesting slice of history.
I think also at this time, I mean, we've talked about it a little bit with like Leslie Howard, but you did have Hollywood stars and that kind of thing going overseas, not just to like serve in the war, but also to show up at camps where soldiers were staying to do basically in-house entertainment.
I read that Ingrid Bergman joined a couple other stars for that type of tour in Europe, but she didn't have a comedy act and she wasn't like particularly good at singing. So her act ended up getting like shorter and shorter afterwards, where it's like everyone still wants to see her, but she doesn't really have any stage acts that like
shows
work
up,
for this.
like waves politely.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone cheers and then it's like, okay, anyway, on to the rest of the stuff. So yeah, just a lot of interesting stuff. And that also goes for music, which thankfully for me, since I listen to songs from this period while I research, it's getting better. Big band, crooners, swing, that's all really popular right now. It's like the Mills Brothers, Frank Sinatra, Bing Crosby, Lena Horne. Like the music's actually becoming pretty pleasant overall.
Are you telling me that we've cracked the hold of big opera?
Opera's dead. Opera is dead by this point because it is a decadent, waste of fabric for all the costumes and time. Like you're sitting in an opera for 4 hours when you could be raising money for the war effort.
You could be driving bolts into an airplane wing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm not seeing any opera, any of that. So hopefully never again. Sorry to any opera fans out there.
But we can't be Timothy Chalamet.
Oh my God!
Like
oh
this.
yeah, you're right. You're right. I mean, it has it's very important, and I will never naysay people who support the opera. But we sat through a lot of opera-based movies and stuff,
with no subtitles.
No subtitle, no anything. So just, give us some grace here. We still love you, opera, but we just don't want to see you anymore.
I'm a millennial with auditory processing issues. Like, come on.
Come on. Think of the millennials.
Be kind to me.
But yeah, so that pretty much ends the history segment of our little podcast here, which means It's time for our new favorite segment,
Yes.
Reincarnation Roulette.
Oh my God, I'd forgotten about this.
You forgot about this?
Yeah,
this
I
is all
somehow
I'm
forgot.
thinking of now. This is what I want to base our whole episodes about. Not even talk about the movies. Let's just talk about who died in 1943 and who was born in 1943.
Yes, okay, I'm so excited. Lay it on me.
Again, this is more or less presented in the order that they appear on famousbirthdays.com. So, if you have any issues with someone should have been mentioned first or last, I'm sorry. That's how the website gave it to me. So, deaths in 1943, Nikola Tesla,
R.I.P.
famous physicist and inventor of the electric motor, AC power, forefather of radio communication, famously in love with a white pigeon at the end of his life.
Oh my God. This year we do get a movie about a physicist in love with a pigeon.
Wait, what?
We do, because Walter Pigeon is in the Madame Curie movie.
Oh my God. Your
It's all
mind
connected.
is so powerful. It's all connected. That's crazy. I'm shocked. I'm shell shocked, as they say. So rest in peace, Nikola Tesla. Gone but not forgotten. Next is George Washington Carver, so the African-American scientist who developed more than 200 products from peanuts, which include cosmetics, dyes, paints, plastics, gasoline, nitroglycerin, importantly, but apparently not peanut butter, which I feel like my life has been a lie. I've always been like, oh yeah, George Washington Carver, peanut butter. No, just everything else peanut
Everything
related,
else
but-
that peanuts are associated with, except for the
except
butter.
for peanut butter. Yeah, I was already out. So I was like, yeah, I guess that makes sense. And then, so sad for the podcast, Leslie Howard died this year. And as we've
Tragic.
already kind of alluded to in some of our other episodes, his commercial plane was shot down by Germans off the coast of Spain. And leading theories are that he was actively working with British and Allied intelligence and that his movements in plane were specifically targeted over it. So I don't know that we'll ever really know, but it is also possible that just because he was so consequential with his known propaganda work and like his films and rallying for support of war efforts and stuff, that he might have been targeted either way without additional spy stuff being involved. But very, very sad. And we did get at least a voiceover from him in one of the movies this year. I don't know if you noticed, but we can talk about that imminently. And then we also lost Sergei Rachmaninoff, Russian pianist, Beatrix Potter, who wrote The Tale of Peter Rabbit. I think there's a biopic about her with Renee Zellweger. And then Sophie Scholl, who many listeners might be familiar with. I think they made a movie about her a few years ago, but she died really young at 21 and was part of the nonviolent student resistance group called the White Rose and was executed for handing out what the Nazi government deemed treasonous political literature. So she was an activist within Germany. And then Fats Waller, a famous American jazz pianist who pretty much laid the basis for modern jazz piano. And then two people that we're familiar with in like smaller contexts. So Conrad Veidt died this year.
Yep.
We saw him in Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. And then the movie that we watched for Pride Month last year, Anders als die Andern. That's the best German I can manage, so sorry. And I believe he also has a part in this year's winner in Casablanca, but he apparently had always had heart issues for which he was taking nitroglycerin tablets. So thanks, George Washington Carver. And then Dwight Fry, who we saw in Frankenstein and in Dracula. So
Who did he play in those?
kind of got typecast. Dracula's little minion.
Oh, Renfield?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
He played Dracula's
Got it.
minion and then also Frankenstein's minion that would
Got it.
aggravate Frankenstein's monster and stuff in that movie. He just always very good at looking manic and kind of crazy. And then I am going to include one fun one just so I can tell listeners to look her up and see the picture that is in her Wikipedia page. So Hilda Hewlett.
I'm cracking open. Hilda
Hewlett, who was the first British woman to earn a pilot's license and co-founded the first flying school in the UK. So look her up and see the picture she used for said license. It is absolutely incredible.
This is so good.
Isn't it so good?
This is amazing. Everyone look this up. I don't want to talk about it too much because the surprise is delightful.
You just have to see it. You have to see it. But that wraps up our deaths in 1943, a moment of silence. And now we move on to births. So births, honestly, this time I can believe that most of these are the same age. I feel like last year I was shocked being like, what? They were born the same year. But these ones are all like, yeah, I can see it. So births in 1943, Robert De Niro, George Harrison, Mick Jagger, Wallace Shawn from The Princess Bride, Sharon Tate, Chevy Chase, Joe Pesci, Jim Morrison, Christopher Walken, Barry Manilow, R.L. Stine, Janis Joplin, and Ben Kingsley. So those were kind of the crop of significant births. And I'd like to think that Beatrix Potter was reincarnated as R.L. Stine.
Yes.
That's my favorite
Sold. I'm convinced. You don't have to tell me anything more than that.
But yeah, that is the end of our reincarnation roulette for 1943. And we can finally start talking about what everyone came for, which is movies. So
movies.
Many movies.
The 8 million movies that we watched this year.
So many movies.
All right. So our first movie then is In Which We Serve, which is the story of a British naval warship, the HMS Torrin. After an attack by German bombers, the ship is slowly sinking. Its history unfolds through a series of flashbacks as remembered by members of her surviving crew. Captain Kinross recalls the ship's rushed commissioning for an inevitable war, his wife's grim acceptance that she's second to his duty and his ship, and an early action where the Torrin's crew was tested by incoming torpedo fire. Similarly, ordinary seaman Blake recalls how he met his soon-to-be wife, a relative of a fellow Torrin crew member, Hardy, and how while the HMS Torrin was saving lives during the Dunkirk evacuation, his wife and Hardy's family were suffering during the Blitz bombings. Eventually, in the present day, the Torrin slips under the sea and is gone forever. Something of a Wake Island wet edition, In Which We Serve acts as a call to action in the war. If you must die, then isn't dying in battle a great way to go?
My main takeaway from this movie was that they found out how to use a wavy, watery effect, and they built a whole movie around it. They were like, every time there's a flashback, look at this cool camera effect. But the main thing, honestly, apart from that stood out to me was the sound design of this movie. Throughout multiple flashbacks when they're actually on the ships and stuff or being fired at from the overhead planes is just, there's this relentless sound of weapons firing or being reloaded. And it just adds so much realism to the overall atmosphere of the whole movie. I really, really love that. I don't know. It gave you a little bit more of the sense of what it was like to actually be on those warships. So in a way, it almost felt a little bit like a documentary. But I did also like several of the flashbacks, particularly when they had that really powerful scene where everyone is like sitting around listening to that official declaration of war and just seeing the tension and then their expressions when they hear it and they have to accept it. So I just thought those were really key elements. I will say I kind of had trouble following who was who, and I don't know. I don't know if that's just me, but
no, I think you run into this problem where it's like, this is a movie in black and white. It's all kind of shot, if not on location, obviously, because they can't necessarily just go dump a bunch of people in the ocean. It's certainly like trying to have sort of a natural lighting situation and a lot of stuff. And a lot of these guys are like covered in soot and grit and that kind of thing. So they all start to kind of look like the same miscellaneous white British guy. So kind of connecting like who they are in the present tense where they're all on this raft trying to survive this subsequent strafing by these German bombers and who they are in the flashbacks can be a little bit hard and muddy. I don't think it's just you. It's definitely something that I had a little bit of difficulty following. For me, at least, this is often true with any war movie, especially where you've got a bunch of dudes in similar uniforms. And again, the like grit and stuff like that gets on their faces. It starts to be really hard to differentiate between the two of them. It usually takes a watch or two to really figure out who people are. Like, I mean, this is another boat thing, but AMC's The Terror is really great. Everyone should watch it. 10 out of 10. But has a bunch of white guys in naval uniforms and they all have facial hair. And it's just notoriously, it's like, which John is this?
I wonder in a lot of ways when this is coming out during wartime, that might even help audiences or servicemen to see themselves in the characters to some degree too, is just like men in uniforms, that it's a very like familiar sight, you know, for a lot of people.
Yeah, it kind of makes these characters more ubiquitous in a way that maybe they wouldn't, especially to American audiences, since these are a bunch of British guys, right? Yeah,
you're not really familiar with like the actors and stuff as an American necessarily. But speaking of actors, baby but not so baby. He's like 17 or something in this. But Richard Attenborough of Jurassic Park spared no expense fame. So
that's crazy.
He was in this,
I did not clock him.
Yep. When I found out it was him, I went back to look at the scenes and I was like, wow, you can tell that it's him, but he was so young in this.
That's wild.
Yeah. Super, super crazy. And they spared no expense with this movie also because so much ammunition and filming and everything. But this was the one that Leslie Howard narrated. So he had the last words of the film, which the last words being, God bless our ships and all who sail in them. And it's a very patriotic, support the war effort sort of thing. And I was like, oh, and then he died this year. So that made me sad. But overall, the movie, I think it was well done. I don't know that I ever like really fully got into it personally.
Yeah, I'm the wrong person to ask about this kind of thing because I will fuck with any boat movie, basically. There's a baseline I'm on board, no pun intended, buy-in from me on any boat movie, especially any like naval warfare movie. Like that's just my shit. Okay. Especially a movie that starts out with Leslie Howard telling me like, this is the story of a ship. Me like, hell yeah. Tell me more, Leslie.
That's so funny to me because you've talked in the past about hating any of the like folksy little openings of like, this is a story about, but if it's a ship, you're like, hell yeah. But if it's a ship,
different story. I don't care about the lives of a one stoplight town in middle America, but do tell me about the life of a ship, Leslie.
Nice.
So I think I agree with you on a lot of the stuff where it's like there's kind of a level of realism and the way that they have shot and set this is really fascinating. I think this is one of the first times too where they do a really great job of when you're on the ship, especially in like the lower wardrooms and that kind of thing, is I don't think it's on a gimbal, which is basically like this big thing where they have a lot of the times now is they actually will put the whole set on a gimbal and the camera is stationary so that like the set can move back and forth. You see this in like Master and Commander, which they did shoot on an actual ship, a lot of that stuff. But some of the set stuff is they have it on a gimbal so that the lights and stuff like that will sway. I think they had the camera on a gimbal for this in some of the stuff because some of the effects of the lights were not quite like timed exactly, but they put a lot of work into the cameras moving a little bit. So it's a constant kind of sense of unsteadiness. And then some things within the set are also clearly like rigged to gently sway and that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of that kind of detail in this movie that I think is really lovely. For me, the human drama part of it doesn't quite stick as well as I want it to. Maybe it's just like a little over long or whatever. Conceptually, like on paper, I'm all for it, where it's this clash of home life and duty and that kind of stuff. And that's really an interesting facet of especially naval service is it's this weird thing of you have your home, but so much of your life is actually really spent on this ship and like your family really is like your crew and that kind of stuff. And how does that interact with your family at home, who you do still spend a lot of time with because a lot of times your ship is in port. So you're just at home, even though you're technically in service. So there's a lot of that interesting dynamic, but for whatever reason, it's just kind of like, well, there it is. It doesn't quite ever come together for me. But all that said, again, I have a base buy-in for boat movies. So I was like, yeah, you know what? This wasn't a terrible way to start this year. And also like the opening sequence is very cool. I really like that it is non-linear kind of in its storytelling in terms of we see the end before we really see the beginning, and that kind of thing is really neat.
Yeah, I liked structurally what they did. I liked what they did for immersion. Like you're mentioning the movement, right, of the camera to kind of mimic the ship movement. And as I mentioned, the sound, like it really is very immersive. But I normally like the drama stuff and the connections to, what was going on in their life prior to service and everything. But I don't know. I just didn't feel connected to maybe because I couldn't tell who was who.
Yeah. It's a little bit too propaganda-y and like not enough flesh and bony. I guess.
It's kind of like Degrassi, right? And then it's like, okay, so in this one friend group, you're gonna get this storyline. You're gonna get this storyline, and this storyline in the same friend group, and it felt like the war propaganda version of that on the ship.
Perfect. Let's not talk about this movie anymore because I want to end on Degrassi.
Well, I do have one, just not a review, but I did see that some of the Navy Admiralty dubbed the movie In Which We Sink because they didn't like that it was a sinking warship and that it made them look weak. But okay, that's my last comment on it.
No, that's interesting. I especially compared to the Marine stuff on like Wake Island and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you want to look strong and powerful, but instead this is men in the water reflecting on what brought them here. So, yeah.
All right. Are we ready to move on to our next movie?
I guess. If we must.
Well, promising. All right. So the human comedy stars Mickey Rooney as Homer Macaulay, a 14-year-old boy growing up during World War II. With his father having passed away sometime prior to the movie's start and his older brother having enlisted in the army, Homer gets a job at the local telegraph office to support his mother and younger brother. Told through a series of episodic vignettes about life in Ithaca, New York, the promise of the movie's central conceit, a boy at home forced to deliver the worst news to his friends, his neighbors, and even his own family, is drastically undercut by cornball sentimentality and an obsession with monologue moralizing about American values.
I mean, your summary is basically perfect. On paper, I love that idea, right? Because you think about like how many different messages, and as you're saying, some of the worst news ever have to be passed on to these people. And there's so much content and potential, but instead it just kind of turns into like a wartime version of Our Town. And I don't hate Mickey Rooney, you know, but it's just
extra frustrating to me because I think that Mickey Rooney's performance is actually like pretty decent in this movie. It's a lot more restrained than some of the stuff that we saw him in, like Boys Town or whatever, where he kind of was just like this over the top. Yeah, way less yelling. I don't want to constitute child acting to the quotient of yelling, but oftentimes that is true, right?
Yeah.
But no, I think he's actually pretty good in this. There's so much potential in the concept of this that it's so frustrating to just see it wasted. There's a point where instead of sticking with Mickey Rooney and the episodic things of what he's doing, is we go with his boss to his bosses to meet his parents. And I'm like, why are we watching this man's miniature romance thing here? It's not important for the story. It takes away from it. It's focusing on the wrong things, basically.
Yeah, it just
also
do it.
Crazy edit to be like, we're hiring this child as a telegram deliverer. What did you even call that? A courier? I don't know. Whatever.
Yeah, a courier. That sounds right.
And literally the first job we're going to show him go on is delivering news that someone's son has died in the war. And then we're going to go do the fun little rompy stuff of like he has to sing happy birthday to his sweetheart as delivered by his school rival. You like do that one first and then do the bad one. Like, can we?
Yeah,
but there's just such a like seesaw. I fully think if you re-edited this movie, there's actually a good movie in here.
I think
and it
so
sucks
too.
that it is what it is.
So some of the like trivia that I know about this, and I'm curious if this was for the better or for the worse, but the person who wrote the original story, like the pitch and everything, William Saroyan, he wanted to do the screenplay as well. And the screenplay that he wrote would have meant that the movie was going to be 5 hours long. And so,
holy shit, dude.
Yeah. And so this was MGM. So Louis B. Mayer hired a screenwriter to essentially whittle it down. And so the writer, Saroyan, was like, okay, well, let me direct the movie, even though he had no experience in directing. And Louis B. Mayer was like, no, you know, basically. And so they assigned like the current director, Clarence Brown, who was nominated for this, did not win. And Saroyan was so bitter about this whole experience that he wrote a play afterwards, pretty much about Louis B. Mayer, titled Get Away, Old Man. And then he went on to adapt.
It's what Louis B. Mayer deserves, but that's
true.
Funny.
Exactly. It's so funny because I'm like, who's right in this situation? And so he went on to adapt this story that he had made for this movie into a full-length novel. And that novel was published within a few weeks of the movie premiere and was a bestseller. And so I'm just like, you know, what was the fuller version of this? Was it less folksy and quaint? Was it a little bit more streamlined, even though it was super bloated? Was Louis B. Mayer the one who's like, we got to make it fun for audiences? You know, I'm so curious about what it was meant to be, or if it would have been way, way worse. But that's kind of the making of the movie. And this version of the movie, though, reportedly was Louis B. Mayer's favorite movie that they made. And I'm just like, okay.
Yeah, I don't know. This movie is so frustrating.
Yeah, I am curious too. Apparently in 2015, it was remade as a movie named Ithaca, which was Meg Ryan's directorial debut. And I wonder if they fixed any of those issues or if it's still kind of the same thing. I don't know that we'll ever find out because
add it to the remakes list.
But yeah, I don't know that I have too much more to say. I think there's a really good movie in there somewhere. Yeah. Not just like a good movie, but like a really good
good one.
And they just didn't do it, you know?
Well, we should watch the Meg Ryan one, and if it sucks, then we can remake it.
Yeah, that sounds good. And then maybe we read the novel and be like, okay,
Yeah.
is everyone getting this wrong, or is the source material just like not good?
My guess is that the source material is also not good. Would be
possible.
like
Yeah.
my shot in the dark is it's probably not good in a different way, but still not good.
Yeah. Can you imagine 5 hours of this though?
No, kill me. I don't even want the 5-hour version of the like good version of this movie. That's such a fundamental like, misunderstanding of what this movie should be.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Are we ready to move on to what I'm sure was your favorite movie of this whole year?
Yes, it was. And yes, I am.
All right. So our next movie is The Oxbow Incident, which stars Henry Fonda and Harry Morgan as two cowboys who have just arrived in a small western town. When news breaks that a local rancher has been murdered and his cattle stolen, the two men find themselves drawn into the posse to find and exact justice on the perpetrators. A western with a sense of claustrophobia, The Oxbow Incident sets out to methodically disassemble the principles of the genre's alleged rugged individualist by reducing them into parts of an unthinking mob. Justice is vulnerable to abuse, and unflinching violence is the rot at the soul of the West.
Okay, so I want to take you on a journey of my little live tweets in my notes.
All right.
So my first notes. Oh no, a dusty western. But it's Henry Fonda. Hope it's good. Also less than 90 minutes. And then at the end, my notes are just 4 crying faces. Holy shit, a crying face. Oh, western made me cry. And then I was just like, oh my God, A+, William Wellman has not missed. Completely exceeded my expectations because
Justification.
Again, like, it was so good though. Can I just shout out just like the perfect pacing. Again, this movie was less than an hour and a half. It wasted no time. The direction was just so tense throughout, and you have this great transition in mood throughout the movie. You go from, oh, what do we do for fun here? We're just boys stopping over in this town, to like getting really raucous and stuff, to then like dangerous, where everyone is so bored that they jump at the opportunity to form a posse to potentially lynch people. And then going through the anxiety and the tension when they're dealing with the people that they come across. And then once everything is said and done and they've done this horrible deed, just the somber silence of the last 5 minutes of the movie. And I was just like, man, what a great movie. I recommend everyone, listeners, go watch this movie and then come back to listen, because we're about to be spoiling everything. But William Wellman, the director, I feel like he hasn't missed from what we've seen, at least, because he did Wings and A Star is Born, both of which I really liked. And this movie, I feel like it could be really easy to shoot it in a very boring theater-y type way, but this crew knew exactly who and what to focus on at all times to just really draw you in to what was going on, the action, the dialogue, because it really is, it's mostly people talking until they're not. You know?
Yeah.
So this was good. This was like, is it a Western though? Like, is it a Western if I like it?
That's yes, it is still here. In fact a Western.
Is it? I don't know if it counts. But if it does count, it is very good. Very good. It might be converting me to this subgenre of Western.
To the subgenre of Westerns.
Yeah,
I think that's fair.
Subgenre.
I think that's fair. There's much like spy movies, right? Where as a genre as a whole, there's a lot of stuff in there going on, and some of it is like, yeah. But also you can get these pockets of it that are like really interesting and doing really fascinating things with not just the genre conventions, but also the audience's perception of the genre.
Yes.
To talk about a little bit about the camera stuff. It's so interesting to me that so much of this is shot on a soundstage. It's a spectacular soundstage in the sense of like they've really built it out, and the set dressing is really complex in terms of trying to make this look like a natural setting, like the actual outdoors environment, but it's absolutely a soundstage. But honestly, to me, that kind of weird sense of the non-reality of the allegedly natural world that they're in and kind of that closed off quality of the environment is actually really interesting.
Yeah, that's
I'm
true.
sure it was probably not necessarily done done for that reason. I'm sure it was just like, hey, we need a controlled environment and we're not going to go film in the desert of California or whatever. But I think the effect is actually really excellent and really lends a weird character to the movie in a way that if you shot this outside, I don't think you would get that same thing.
Yeah, that's so interesting. This is one that I would watch again. So I'm like, it's only 80 something minutes and easy to do with that in mind. Because that's true. I didn't think about that in a way, almost like Uncanny Valley, right? Like this is taking place, not fully rooted in reality. But the other thing that is making me think of a little bit is because obviously this movie deals with the dangers of, mob mentality and stuff. And the other movie that I think did that really well that we watched as a bonus was M. But in that movie, you're kind of grappling with what to do when you do have the right person, but do you give them up to the mob? Like, what are the ethics surrounding vigilante justice? And then here, this is taking a look at what unfortunately often happens, right? And it's like when you have the wrong people who are innocent and you give them up to the mob, what an ugly reality that is. So really cautionary tale about that sort of thing, right? So yeah, this movie was it was so good. And I was just completely locked in once they came across the three men that they were accusing, right, of having murdered the like rancher who ended up also just like not even being dead. So like just how quick, just wait a day, get your facts straight, do any of these things. But there were so many good moments. And the actor who played, because obviously Henry Fonda, I think was great as Gil. He's kind of the audience's lens into this. There's so many characters in this also, but the one who like wrote the letter to his wife and was trying to claim their innocence. Donald Martin, maybe. So Dana Andrews. That sounds right. But just the whole time I was just like, no. Like, it's so clear that you need to give them more time. You need to wait for the sheriff. You need to have an actual trial. You're really playing with fire here. And I think they did such a great job too with the character of the Confederate soldier trying to relive his glory days. Like literally he dresses up for their posse, right, to go find these guys in his Confederate uniform. And he's the one who takes the reins in determining this is what we're going to do. They're guilty, everything. He always has an answer for like why their excuses aren't enough. And you can just tell. And the son calls him out on this later, of course, that it's like, this is just a power play for him. This is just gleeful violence and joy in like being able to step on other people. It's not even rooted in a sense of justice. It's rooted in a sense of self-importance. So I don't know. There were just so many good things going on with the different players in this. Also, shout out to the Reverend in this, who we saw, he was Crooks in Of Mice and Men and was the moral compass in this movie. So there were just great scenes. The fact that it only ended up being 7 men who wanted to wait until the sheriff goes versus however many were total in the mob, like 30 plus or something, was just like, damn, what like I said, cautionary tale against mob justice. It was really good.
You know what else I really love about this? It's like a small thing, but I love that there is a woman in the mob.
Yeah.
Just because, cool, support women's wrongs.
Yes, that's my favorite theme.
but it's like literally, it's so much of the movies that we've watched for the last couple of years, or frankly, just in general. Cinema loves to make women correct constantly. There's a real push of like a feminine moral purity. That is, not only is it objectively wrong because women can be bad, but it is a subset of putting women on a pedestal and making them non-human in a way.
Right,
if women must be perfect, then they're a different species. They're not actually human. Like, we don't respect them as people, as individuals who have thoughts, emotions, that kind of thing. Yeah,
it's dehumanizing. And like, even if it's for a positive meaning, it's dehumanizing.
Yeah. So very cool to see a woman involved in what is objectively a horrible thing. But it's just really interesting to see, I don't know, Kitty Foyle, she is not, right? In terms of like a woman who is also complicit in this violence and this horrible thing that is at the heart of this movie, I think is a really thoughtful choice.
I loved that. And at first, before I knew what type of movie it was, when she first comes on screen to join the party, I was like, ooh, we're getting like a lot of different representation. And then as the movie turned darker, I was still happy for that because it's just more true to reality. Because again, women can be wrong.
Like, at no point does this woman cringe from what they're doing. In fact, she is not just an active participant, but one of like the active participants, right?
Yeah, exactly. Which, on that note, the scene where they have the 3 men that they've apprehended tied tied up, and they're going back and forth on what to deal with them. And you just see the 3 nooses already prepared in the background, constantly there, while everyone else is just eating or hanging out and treating it like it's just another night. Well, this is potentially the last night for these 3 men. Was just like, damn, it's just really powerful. Like a lot of dark elements that were contrasted with people are having fun with this. And it's just like, oh, that's dark. That's really dark. So
yeah,
of course, I loved it.
We'll have an example of maybe like what not to do in this setting later on. But I think it's really interesting that so much of this movie is, like you said, it's a bunch of standing around and talking, waiting for a violent thing to be done. And somehow that is still really engaging. What the scenes are focused on and the performances are all, there's still a constant tension being built up through those. It's just really just so effective.
Well done. So well done. So it's based on a novel by Walter Van Tilburg Clark, which is just too many names. And apparently, so William Wellman loved the novel. It was, I think, published a few years prior to this, and he wanted to make it into a movie, but someone else, Harold Hurley, already had the film rights to it. And so William Wellman went to talk to him to be like, okay, well, what kind of movie do you have in mind? Maybe we can work together to get this done. Harold Hurley wanted this movie to revolve around a saloon hostess played by Mae West.
What?
Yeah, I want to see what he thought this would. What?
Maybe the source material is radically different, and like maybe it all happens in a saloon.
No, I don't think, because I've looked at some of the differences from the novel, and there weren't that many differences. So I'm just like, Harold, are you okay? Like, what
Harold
do you
was
mean?
snapping up any Western property
and just
being
let's put Mae West in it.
We're gonna put Mae West in it. He saw that other movie that also turned everyone into a Mae West fan about how saucy she was as
She'd
like
done
a
him
saloon
wrong.
mistress.
Yeah.
And yeah, there we go. Thank you.
Yeah.
He saw that and was like, we got to make another one of these.
He was like, we're going to make a series of Westerns with Mae West, Mae Westerns, and we're going to make a fortune.
God damn it. Mae Westerns is so good.
Crazy. It's so good. We could have had that. But anyway, so Hurley eventually, like, he had to leave Paramount. So he sold the rights to William Wellman for like $6,000 or something. And Wellman went to try and find someone to make this. There was pushback. I think it makes sense. Hays Code, wartime, you want more positive, uplifting messages and stuff. So it was actually hard to get anyone to agree to produce the movie. But eventually,
that doesn't surprise me. Yeah.
Daryl Zanuck was like, yeah, we can. It is a movie with like an important message. Financially, it was a little bit of a flop, even though obviously it was like very well regarded for its themes. But also just a reminder that at this time, it wasn't just the wartime. It wasn't just feel good movies. It wasn't just the Hays Code, but like lynching was still going on in much of America, especially in the South. So that was something that people were aware of. And just like in previous years where producers and stuff didn't want to upset segregationists, it was the same thing going on here, right? Like we don't want to upset the South. Which is crazy because this is just, I'm glad this movie was made. It was fantastic, I thought. And some of the differences that I saw from the book, I actually mostly like, which is unusual. Usually when they change stuff, I'm like, I don't know why they did that. But in the novel, the son of the Confederate soldier, he was forced into participating in all of this, and it like really affected him. In the movie, you get, to me, a really effective scene where he is essentially calling his dad out for being a coward from the other side of the door. And then, the Confederate soldier shoots himself. So in the novel, the son commits suicide, and then the Confederate general like sees that and then kills himself. So it's more of like a double suicide sort of thing. But actually, I liked the moment, that like kind of bit of catharsis for that man being called out for what he is and what he did. So I'm glad they made that change. And then the novel ending is that the sheriff, when he sees what the like lynch mob has done, he is really upset and infuriated with everyone. But then eventually he just pretty much declares that he's going to pretend he didn't see anybody and that he doesn't know anything. And they leave it at that. So it's like a much darker ending.
I mean, I love that, but
I love it too. But I'm also like, I don't know if I could have handled that ending. It'd be so sad. I think I would have loved it, but I'd be like taken out for days. So I like how this ended up personally.
Sure.
Oh, and then one other call out on trivia that I found out. The role of Gil Carter, so that was Henry Fonda's character in this, it was originally offered to Gary Cooper, who turned it down. And I just have to say, thank God. Because, we'll talk about this more imminently, but his delivery leaves a lot to be desired, in my opinion. Like, he delivers his lines like he's reading a haiku. There's just something about Gary Cooper where I'm like, I don't quite understand why he was A-list, you know?
Yeah, I feel like it's really interesting to so quickly have been, because I was not impressed with Harry Fonda when we saw him in Jezebel, that William Wyler.
Henry
Betty
Fonda, put some respect on his name.
Sorry, Henry Fonda. Again, I was not impressed with him in Jezebel, but it's really, really nice to have seen him in it wasn't Of Mice and Men, it was the other one.
Grapes of Wrath.
Thank you. Grapes of Wrath, and this, where it's like, he's really, truly excellent in these movies.
Yeah.
I feel like this kind of gives him weirdly a little bit more space to go in terms of the character, despite how short the movie is and how little really the character has to do. But there is the thing of like, him and his friend really only get involved because they have blown into town, and they're like, if we don't get involved in this, people are going to think that we did it. So there's a real quiet thing happening with his character in the background that, frankly, if you had a less able actor in that position, it would be really flat and just feel very rote of like, well, yeah, of course this guy stands up to these people. But he manages to like really bring that off the page in a way that is interesting and makes the character more dimensional than I suspected. Like, if we had a Gary Cooper in this role, there'd be no surprise at the point where Gil and Art step over that line to go stand with the other guys who are like, we don't want to do this lynch mob thing. It would just be like, well, yeah, obviously that's what's going to happen. Yeah,
very, very true. So I'm glad that it worked out the way that it did. And I think this and Grapes of Wrath, both great performances by him. And I think they were both roles that he said were amongst his favorites. And I'm like, yeah, they're both kind of strong messages. And
good taste.
Well done.
Good taste, Henry.
Good taste, Henry. Yeah.
All right. So are we ready for the massive tonal shift that's going to occur with this next movie?
Yeah, it just whiplash.
And then we'll saw back again.
Right.
All right. So our next movie is The More the Merrier, which stars Jean Arthur as Connie Milligan, a young woman trying to sublet her DC apartment during a wartime housing crisis, who gets more than she bargained for when retired millionaire Benjamin Dingle talks her into a rental agreement. Roommate shenanigans ensue and are intensified when Dingle further sublets his half of the apartment to the handsome Joe Carter. Despite Connie's firm intentions to marry her rich fiancé, after all, her mother married for love, and that was a mistake, according to Connie. She's swayed by Joe's charms and good looks and seeming genuine interest in her as a person. Their relationship is helped along by Dingle playing Cupid, who exposes her fiancé as a guy who really only cares about his own reputation. The More the Merrier is frothy, funny, and leans heavily on Jean Arthur's endless charm. The only question is whether its underbaked plot is sufficiently offset by its hijinks quotient.
Okay, so another George Stevens movie. So he did last year's Talk of the Town. Previously, Alice Adams. Loved Talk of the Town. And I really loved a lot of this movie. But then it did kind of lose me more, I guess, towards the end. But Jean Arthur was just a joy to watch.
So
and I loved Charles Coburn as Dingle was really, really funny and delightful through this. And I think that Jean Arthur and Joel McCrea also had great chemistry. Like the scene when he first moves in and they're like passing each other unknowingly as they get ready throughout the day. And then they finally see each other and she has like the full face mask and he's drinking his coffee and he does like the spit take comedy, peak comedy. But yeah, so I loved the characters. Just, I think it kind of lost me towards the end when it was much more about just like finding any reason to not be with Richard Gaines.
Yeah, it's like, well, the part where they're like, well, now we actually have to get these characters together and figure out how we make that happen, right? So I will say, I feel like Joel McCrea, sorry, I don't know how to pronounce his name.
McCrea? Who knows?
Who knows? We've seen him in a couple movies like The Foreign Correspondent and Dead End. Yeah. And he's been great in those, but dang, he's so handsome in this.
Yes. Very handsome.
Again, maybe chalk that up to the chemistry with Jean Arthur, but it's like, wow, handsome. He's also so tall. So is it is he handsome or is he tall question? I don't know. But yeah.
To be fair,
he's excellent.
I think in Dead End and Foreign Correspondent, I thought the same thing anyway.
Yeah, sure.
But like here, he actually uses that to great effect, because a lot of the narrative is ultimately built around that, where Dingle's like, don't you like this handsome guy? And Jean Arthur is like, he do be handsome.
He do be handsome. It's true.
It's true. It's true. So I had a lot of fun with him. Also have to call out, and so this is also the movie that I was thinking of in terms of overseas. This is just a fun movie to increase morale amongst the troops. Everyone has a laugh and everything. But this scene where they're coming back from dinner and his hands are just all over her constantly was like the steamiest scene we've seen. I'm like, that is Hays Code pornography right there.
How did they let this happen?
How did they let this happen? I feel like, was that Vaseline on the lens, or is just everything steaming up? It was insane, because she had like a,
it's like kissing the back of her neck. Spicy.
Yes. Yeah, like crazy spicy. She had a shawl, and as they're walking, he's helping her fix it, but his hands grazing her shoulder constantly.
There's
and like
also
her neck
like extras in the
too.
Background, like necking in the background too. So
Exactly. So I was like, oh my God, Hays Code. How did they let this happen? This is
and
a
then they go
wartime
into the
Hays Code.
same apartment. Oh my
And then
God.
they go into the same, and then they go into the same apartment where, you know, they share a wall between their two beds. And so it's shot where you can see both of them and just that one dividing line, but it more or less looks like they're in the same bed talking. I was like circumventing the Hays Code. I don't know. I was like, this is spicy. This is spicy for 1943. That's crazy.
But no, I agree with you in terms of like all the preamble stuff and all the kind of like comedy stuff. Really excellent.
Loved
Obviously,
it,
the performances are really funny and good. Jean Arthur continues to be a delight. Like in that scene where you mentioned where they pass each other and they're in their separate rooms and he spits out his coffee. But the thing that Jean Arthur does with her body, where it's like all of her limbs like stick straight out of her, like straight
like a
out,
scared cat,
and
basically.
she like crab walks back into the hallway. It's so fucking funny.
Yeah. I love her
Just
so much.
High art. But yeah, like the actual semantics of the movie kind of bog it down. I do think, I will say, I feel like if we hadn't watched The Talk of the Town, which is by the same director and has a lot of the same people in it, and the same Threes company, there's extra people involved here, and that makes it both complicated and funny. I feel like if we hadn't literally just watched that, I would probably be more of a fan of this movie than I am, but it doesn't work as well as that one, so automatically it's already playing with one hand tied behind its back, right?
Yeah.
But in general, I just think it's just not as good as that one, and I do think even without that comparison, it kind of starts to wander at the end in a way that is not particularly satisfying.
Yeah, no, I agree. And again, just this stuff with Pendergast, they tried to kind of make him a villain loosely at the end, but it wasn't convincing. They just felt really forced to then be like,
very
see, it's
Pat,
okay for her to,
She doesn't need a reason. She can just go.
Yeah, she can just go. And it's like, you can just do that. But I did like loved her in this. Like I said, chemistry was great. I feel like When Harry Met Sally might have taken some inspiration from this, just in terms of like the type of person that she is. Because when she's going in like, and at 6:45, the alarm goes off, and then you're going to be here, and then I'm going to be here. And at 7 o'clock precisely, we're going to do that. Like, she's so type A throughout everything. Right. I was like, this is kind of the framework from what we've seen in a lot of those romantic comedies and stuff.
Sure.
But yeah, she was delightful. She only made like 4 more movies after this, one of which being the Western Shane, surprisingly. That was directed also by George Stevens, because after this, George Stevens finished his contract with Columbia with this movie. And then he went off, as we mentioned last episode, to film documentary footage and stuff during the war. And then when he came back, he made mostly dramas and Westerns. So I'm glad that they got to work together again on Shane. I think it was nominated, so we'll probably end up seeing it. Hopefully by then I like Westerns more. Who knows?
I can't say I'm a Shane fan, but...
Ooh, interesting. I mean, I probably won't be either then, to be fair. But I will be happy to see Jean Arthur either way. And yeah, apparently she just really, really struggled with severe anxiety throughout her entire career and found performing really difficult. I think this was also her last contracted movie with Columbia, and she had specifically sought out the writer to make this screenplay so that she could finally say yes to a movie, because she kept just turning down roles because she didn't like them. So after this movie, that ended her contract, and reportedly she ran through the lot just being like, I'm free, and then like didn't make very, like I said, just 4 more movies after that. So I love her and she's delightful, but it's also just like, damn, it sounds like she was not having a good time in Hollywood at this time.
I'm glad that she got out, I guess, is kind of the moral of this.
Like, sad for us,
like it wasn't good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, anything else to say about this movie?
No.
All right, so now we can get back my axe to grind so we can talk about For Whom the Bell Tolls, which is yet another adaptation of a Hemingway novel, this time starring Gary Cooper as Robert Jordan, a volunteer soldier charged with blowing up a key bridge with the help of a band of anti-fascist guerrilla fighters during the Spanish Civil War. Jordan is a cynical demolitions man grimly determined to get the job done with a minimum of collateral damage if and where possible. His sense of duty is challenged by the local guerrilla band's leader Pablo, who would rather preserve his group's safety over the success of what he's deemed a suicide mission. That's not a feeling shared by the whole group, however, and soon the infighting over who's in charge and the repercussions of that serve to stall, delay, and erode at the chance of the mission's success. During this, Jordan falls in love with one of the guerrillas, Maria, a young woman whose life has been shattered by the war. The interpersonal dramas are eventually forced to come to a head when it becomes clear that doing nothing is impossible. Fighting here is a matter of existential survival, even if not everyone will make it out. Unfortunately, if any of that sounded interesting or exciting, you'll be disappointed to learn that 90% of this 3-hour movie is people talking in caves, led by Gary Cooper giving yet another nothing burger performance against Ingrid Bergman's sexy baby Maria, directed by the hack Sam Wood, and filmed in glorious Technicolor so you can't miss any of the brown face.
Oh, man. Well, I'm glad you ended on that because, like, yes. Like, I learned a little bit more about the Spanish Civil War, but this movie, other than taking place 90% in a cave, as you said, it had, like, One Piece pacing where every scene was dragged out so much, like 3 times as long as it should have been. Dialogue was repeated so much. And I'm like, wasn't celluloid and, like, film a precious commodity at this point? What are you doing?
Not to jump to the end, but the goodbye scene between him and Maria is like, who scripted this? Yes. This is the take we're going with.
Oh my God.
Crazy.
It was so bad. Like, it could have benefited from just like a more cutthroat editor. Like, where's Ralph Dawson when you need him to just whittle down 3,000 feet of film into like 1,000? I'm sorry,
but Sam Wood is a shit director.
Yes, thank you. I looked up what else he did and I was like, oh, okay, yes, this makes sense.
Everything is shot not just the most boring way humanly possible, but in a way that it's not interesting to look at. No shot is revealing anything about the character. I don't think the performances are good in this movie,
especially Gary Cooper.
Really underlines actually how important you can have. I don't want to say, I don't know. I haven't seen a Gary Cooper performance yet that I've like loved, but you can have this star-studded cast because you've got Ingrid Bergman there and all that stuff. And like even the woman playing Pilar, she's actually quite excellent.
I think
under
she
the
won
brown
best
face.
Supporting, under the brown, which also everyone looked like they had just straight up dull clay on their face. Like it just looked bad. I don't know.
Yeah, just bad. This is at a time where, no one can decide if you're a Greek actor, are you white? Or do we need to be racist against you, etc.
Right.
So there's these decent performances, but it really just underscores actually how important it is knowing where to put the camera and how to actually capture those performances. There are ways to shoot this movie where you could have brought some more out of, again, I just don't love Gary Cooper, some of his performance out in a way that is really interesting, but instead it's just shot like it's god awful. And for listeners, so he directed Our Town, Kitty Foyle, Pride of the Yankees, and then Goodbye, Mr. Chips. But that movie was fantastic, but it had nothing to do with the directing. It had everything to do with the narrative arc and Robert Donat as the main actor. Yeah, I think Greer Garson Donat and Greer Garson are really like they carried that movie because that I would say is also shot in a similarly
just kind of a boring way, like nothing. Yeah.
I think too. Okay, so getting back to the thing where I was talking about a little bit about Henry Fonda's performance in Oxbow Incident and kind of like how that character works is there are directors who are really interested in like the humanity of the characters versus it feels like there are directors who are really interested in the archetype of the characters. Yeah, and I can see that. There's so much archetype in this story and not enough about the people. And in a story that is so fundamentally should be about the people, to have that completely stripped out of the movie, it hollows out the guts of the movie in a way that it's like nothing matters anymore, which is a real shame. Yeah, I think that is incredibly accurate because, again, looking back to especially Our Town and Kitty Foyle and this movie, For Whom the Bell Tolls, it's just archetypes. And I know Goodbye, Mr. Chips, you kind of sensed that a bit as well. And to me, it still worked because I think Greer Garson and Robert Donat just bring humanity to their roles. But I will say, so early in this movie, I had initially high expectations
expectations. I haven't read this novel, but I know that it's one of Hemingway's best, usually when people bring stuff up. And that opening sequence with the Michael Bay explosions and the lighting and the contrast between the blue dawn sky and the red from gunfire and like actual fire, everything silhouetted. It looked great, kind of almost like Indiana Jones coded adventure type stuff. And then it just kept getting worse. All of it was filmed in a cave. All of the dialogue was incredibly repetitive. Like some of my notes in the middle of this movie, and there's an intermission in this movie, by the way, y'all. So like it is a long movie and it did not need to be this long, and it did not need to all take place in a cave, or even if it did, you could have made it more fun, more dynamic somehow. But in the center of this movie, in all caps, I have, "We get it. Her hair is short. We get it. Pablo is obnoxious. We get it. He doesn't have a beard. We get it. He doesn't provoke." There were just so many scenes with just repeated dialogue that I was losing my mind. And it did not help, as I said, that Gary Cooper's delivery is just, a little bit stunted. I get that maybe that was his style to some degree, but it almost feels like he's maybe not reading from the script, but that he didn't have it perfectly memorized. Like I don't believe that he is that character speaking those words. He is Gary Cooper saying those lines.
Yeah. It's a shame too, because there's like an opportunity here to do something really interesting. Like Gary Cooper's character in the first scene, what happens is the guy that he's sabotaging the train with gets shot, and the guy's like, "You promised," and Gary Cooper kills his wounded compatriot before like escaping.
And that's why, again, like up to that scene, I was like, oh damn, this is going to be a good movie.
Yeah.
Did not know.
So there's a really interesting character at the heart of this that is very counter to a lot of kind of the war propaganda characters that we're seeing in these war movies, where they're very honorable, very noble. Like there's parts of that because obviously Jordan's character at the end of the day is doing this for the greater good, basically. Yeah. And is willing to do a lot of stuff to accomplish that. But there's layers to that in terms of like, this is not a perfect person. Like he's willing to get his hands dirty in a way that frankly a lot of these characters that we see are not willing to do. Or at least, at the very least, the movie recognizes the fact that they are in fact imperfect moral decisions that this character is having to make versus kind of rationalizing it to be like, oh, well, Yeah. So there's a real opportunity there to contrast a lot of these hoorah war propaganda movies that are coming out at this period, like the Wake Islands and that kind of thing, making it more complicated and human. And it just doesn't happen.
Yeah. And I do think we'll see a little bit of that theme in other movies, or at least one other movie this year, where again, it's the concept of needing to get your hands dirty to try and make a better future for others, so it is, there's still kind of that self-sacrificial heroism, but it is a recognition of this is ethically a bad thing that we wish we didn't have to do, which I do think probably speaks to a struggle that so many people have in war. And calling back to an earlier Gary Cooper movie we watched, Sergeant York, that was the whole theme, even though his performance in that movie was not great, but there's still hints of that sort of recognition of killing people takes a toll on people who, without being in this circumstance, without being in a world with war, they would be able to be more of your like upright, upstanding people. But instead they are forced into this really difficult choice. And so, yeah, that's kind of Gary Cooper in this movie, and then another character in a movie that we'll talk about shortly.
Yep. But before we get to that,
there's so much tonal whiplash. And again, this is what I'm saying. It's like overseas, they must have had 2 movie theaters constantly. They're like, do you want the wartime feel good about patriotism and what you're doing drama, or do you want some goofy comedy? It's like what it feels like. So
yeah,
here we go again.
On that subject, Heaven Can Wait centers deceased playboy Henry Van Cleve as he arrives at the outer office of the underworld, asking permission from Satan to get a pass into hell. When the devil doubts his credentials, Harry recounts the story of his life in an attempt to convince the big guy downstairs that he belongs there. He doesn't do an especially great job of it, though. While trying to tell a story about him being a dissolute womanizer, Henry really recounts a perfectly charming romance. Sure, he may run around with showgirls in his youth and sure he does in fact steal away his cousin's fiance, but he and that stolen fiance Martha prove to have a genuine faithful connection. Sure, there are a few misunderstandings here and there, but ultimately they prove to all be legitimately well-intentioned, to the point that it's difficult to understand why Henry in the afterlife is determined to pull a fast one over on Lucifer. For a movie ostensibly about choosing pleasure over responsibility, all to good end, Heaven Can Wait lands a little stiffly despite strong chemistry between the leads and director Ernst Lubitsch's enduring compassion for layabout fops.
This is like the Magnificent Ambersons, but make it a comedy. It's like he is so spoiled.
Right.
Their family is so rich. And it's just like, it got some good laughs out of me, but I do feel like this movie felt a lot longer than it needed to be.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, because I was going to say, I don't know if it's because I watched it on Tubi and there were commercials.
I mean, that definitely is also extending the runtime, but it is, I feel like it's much longer than it needs to be.
Yeah, it almost felt like a lot of the things that you hate about biopics, where we're seeing like too much of his life. There's too much.
I don't
kind
need
of
to see every birthday,
we don't need to see every birthday. So I think not Ernst Lubitsch's best, but I did enjoy seeing Don Amici in the leading role, and I think he did have great chemistry with, I think, Jean Tierney. I don't know if that's how her name is pronounced.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's also lovely to look at. The Technicolor is really pretty. I don't know about yours, but the print I watched was gorgeous. Just really, really pretty to look at. And the costume design is delightfully insane. It's so over the top, especially in the like earlier sequences of the life, because, you know, fashion changes or whatever, but they're really leaning into all the frills and stuff like that of the earlier periods, especially on his mom and grandmother and dad and that kind of stuff. There's so much happening in the costuming, which is delightful to see. But
yeah, I would agree with that. And also just a shout out to the set that they created for Hell/Satan's office. Almost looked like a Kubrick set, where it just looked very modern or postmodern. And I was really surprised seeing Don Amici walk down those steps into that set, because I was like, this is very different. And then, of course, we transition into, as you're saying, the late 1800s styles, and then transition through time. So yeah, I think very light movie. Didn't take a whole lot of notes on this, but I do have a lingering question afterwards, because I feel like, unless I missed it, the movie doesn't make it super clear whether or not throughout his and Martha's marriage he ever did actually cheat on her. We know the one showgirl that he tries to pay off to get his son out of the picture, that was intentional, but was it because obviously it's not subject matter that Ernst Lubitsch shies away from. Like in the, what was it, 1 Hour with You? Was that the one where it's all about like the cheating husband and stuff? Because it's like, when you love him, you let him do it. Teehee. It's obviously like a subject matter that is not taken super seriously to Ernst Lubitsch. So I don't know. I don't know how to take that ultimately. If it was, yes, he did enjoy being a Casanova type in his youth, but it was all for like good fun, or if it was misunderstandings, you know?
Yeah, I don't know that we can say for sure, because typically I'd be like, if that's actually what was happening, I think that we would have seen it, especially to your point with Lubitsch being like, no, this is the thing that happens, I'm going to show it. But that was also pre-Hays Code. And so was that not something that they could do? I don't know. But I tend to lean towards it didn't happen, just because of the fact of like, we don't get that on screen anywhere. They go to such great efforts to prove that he's not cheating on her the one time that she does leave him, that I feel like they could have slipped in something in there to have some plausible deniability, but I feel like they just work too hard to prove otherwise, that I have a hard time believing that there's that subtext. I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like that's kind of fair, because I could go either way on it, because also the showgirl that is dating his son, she knows his name, you know, knows his reputation and knows like all of those things. So to me is like, again, maybe in his youth still, like in the early years of their marriage, who knows? I don't know if we ever get a clear answer. And I do think it's a good point to bring up that 1 Hour with You was pre-Hays Code. So even if he was in this movie, like post-Hays Code, I don't think that they would have been able to do it, because the whole ending is that he doesn't go to hell, you know, whereas the Hays Code is just like, no, punishment, you know, if you do bad things, you have to get punished. He'd have to go to hell. Exactly. Versus here, I think Ernst Lubitsch is like, that's not something you go to hell for. It was just for fun, you know? So like kind of skirting around that. So I think it's interesting that you never truly know for sure. I think a lot of the dialogue was really fun. A lot of the costuming was really fun. A lot of great performances. So it was like a fun, light movie, but just, a little overly long, and not one of my favorites from him.
I think this movie is fine, but the thing that's more interesting to me is its place in context, in the sense of like, we've seen a lot of Ernst Lubitsch movies where you've got to lay about fop getting success or whatever. A lot of it's pre-Hays Code, so it's kind of like sexy comedy stuff, sexual escapades, etc. But it's really interesting to me to see this movie in the context of a period where socially and culturally and even entertainment wise, so many of the movies are focused on being an upstanding citizen who is doing your patriotic duty, etc. So like really the thing that is most interesting to me here is that thing of, no, this guy's going to choose to have fun and is in fact going to have fun and be perfectly fine. Like, he doesn't get punished for it. He still gets to go to heaven. Like, we can have a conversation about whether or not he actually cheated on his wife or not. But ultimately, he still snaked his cousin's fiance and married her. And like, when she died, he returned to partying. So there's something interesting there about Lubitsch being like, actually, no, I know the war's on, but you can still have fun and still be like,
you're allowed.
You're allowed to do that. Fun. And that doesn't make you a terrible person.
Yeah, that is very true. I guess I was just viewing it as escapism, but rather than just escapism, it's more like a permission that you can still enjoy the frivolity of life that's kind of being taken away from you through these very serious world events and stuff. So I like that. That is
Does it make me love the movie? No, but again, I think like in the
it's
context, it's interesting, right?
Yeah.
All right. Anything else to say about this movie?
I don't think so. It was light. I liked the context that you gave it. So it feels more just like, yeah, that's pretty good.
All right. Well, stop being funny. It's time for a serious movie. Watch on the Rhine stars Paul Lucas and Betty Davis as Kurt and Sarah, a couple engaged in clandestine anti-fascist activities who have brought their family to America to lay low with Sarah's family while Kurt recovers his health. Their search for safety is spoiled, however, by another house guest, a Romanian count actively conspiring with the German embassy in an effort to win back a life in Europe. This slow parlor drama, whose origins as a stage play are clearly visible in its contained setting and long dialogue-heavy scenes, threatens to explode when the Count, having discovered Kurt's plan to return to Germany to help a notorious resistance worker, threatens to expose the plot unless paid to keep silent. Watch on the Rhine takes its time exploring its central questions. How much are you willing to sacrifice in the fight against something horrendous? Yourself, your marriage, your soul, your children? For how long? For a year? For 5? For forever?
Dang. So, yeah, I mean, directly speaking to some of the themes that we just brought up in terms of what are you willing to sacrifice to make a better world? And literally, I think one of the lines from Paul Lucas playing the husband, Kurt, I think was his name in this, after he goes off to kill the blackmailer. But he says, I hope that we can make a world where all men can die in bed, because it's just like such a violent time where people are having to take sides. And honestly, it was really bold of the blackmailer to threaten people in a house where you are very outnumbered. And it's very clear that you have not given anyone else the info
kind
yet.
of relying on a concept of what is socially acceptable and that will insulate you.
Right. And just a lack of recognition of, especially for Kurt and Sarah Muller, who have been having to hop around from countries and who have been very deeply entrenched in this very dangerous resistance fighting, is like, you are underestimating what they potentially have already done to continue surviving, where you just think like, oh, you know, we're just two people who each have leverage, or I hold more leverage. It's like, you don't know what they have done to be here right now, like what they have had to sacrifice in terms of what you think is moral or immoral, and the ethics, the lengths that they're willing to go. So yeah, like I said, very bold, very stupid of that blackmailer. Because even me sitting on the couch, I was like, I could just kill him. At this point. Sir.
There's an easy solution to this problem. But I will say, I think that, like, we're joking, easy solution to this problem, but I love the fact that Kurt, when he goes to go say goodbye to his children, because he's now, like, he's killed a man, he has to go on the run, he's going to go back to Germany. He needs to go back now while he still has the opportunity, because eventually people are going to find out about this crime.
The
like,
murder.
It's inevitable. So he just has to get away at this point. Him talking to his children, he's very specific to be like, you're going to find out that I did something terrible, and it's still terrible even though I did it. And he's like speaking to the fact that his children really adore him and think that he's incredible, because they know that he's done all these brave things. Yeah, can do no wrong. But there's a specific thing where it's like, this person was terrible and was threatening us and threatening other people's livelihoods, but killing him was still an awful thing.
Still wrong.
Yeah.
Because ideally, it'd be like, okay, you'd be able to arrest him, blackmail, all of these things, right? But the stakes are so high that that's just not an option for not a realistic option. So yeah, I think the ending was very powerful and spoke to a lot of those difficulties in ethics that so many people were being faced with here. And it's just like about doing the best you can and trying to be brave in some of the most horrific circumstances that you can think of. And like I said, I think that's why I liked that line so much, right? Of making a world where all men can die in bed. Like that's a luxury to live in those types of peace times. The Hays Code, like the production code, definitely, I know that they were concerned about Kurt Muller basically being able to actually escape prosecution for that murder, because one of the rules, as we remember, is bad things have to face justice, right? Like you can't have killers escape, etc. So in this one, they really wanted it to show at the end of the movie that Kurt was killed by the Nazis at the end of the movie, kind of as like a payment for his crime. But the director and the studio were just like, well, we don't want Nazis to get that kind of final
we don't want the
justice.
Nazis
Like that just
to win at the end.
Yeah, exactly. So instead, middle ground, leave it with him leaving the country and stuff, and you don't need to really know.
And there's plausible deniability there too, right? Because the last scene is his oldest son. Basically, like they haven't heard back from him
for months. Yeah.
So the son is planning to be like, well, I'm going to go do it next.
Right.
So like, I mean, maybe he did get caught by the Nazis and,
Right. But we don't know.
punished by the universe.
And it's, yeah, exactly. And I also think it is realistic to not have any word about was he successful or not successful. And I think that also speaks to a lot of things like we saw in the Telegram movie, right? Of like, you're just waiting for word consistently. And sometimes you don't get it for weeks or months. And then sometimes eventually when you do, it's bad news. So I think it just also speaks to the reality of the time. So I liked it this way. Hays Code is just, they're a little too crazy about some things. There also was apparently in a much more silly direction for the Hays Code. So Joseph Breen was the head of the production code at this point. And the scene where they're getting the tour of the house, he objected to part of that scene because it showed the bathroom where you could see the toilet. And they were like, can't have that. Can't know that people
piss.
Shit. Yeah, exactly. So I was like, you guys are so stupid.
Bodily functions are impure.
They're impure and they must be punished. I was like, okay, relax. So yeah, but I think to me that ending sequence is where all the power of the movie comes from. I think the performances prior to that are really good. I liked the grandma's character. I thought she was perfectly catty, kind of like that dowager type, just always had like a funny line for everything.
Like at one point I leaned over and turned to my friend and was like, man, I can't wait to get old. Like, that's the
she's
vibe.
Goals. There was a scene where she was sitting with her sister or her friend, like one of the other older women, and they're in the car together. And her friend is just yapping. And then this woman, the elder Farrelly, is like, you must get new upper teeth. No one can understand you. It's just so ridiculous. I was like, that's so mean. So yeah, she was kind of delightful. But I did find out that she and Betty Davis didn't really get along very well because Betty Davis was an activist for a lot of pro-worker rights and obviously anti-Nazi. And that's not to say that Lucille Watson was pro-Nazi, but she was very like conservative, staunch Republican. So they kind of butted heads over that. But I think it worked for her character because she was great.
Great casting between them too as well. They look very believable as
believable as family.
Yeah. I will say I think that this movie is excellent and I really love Lucas's performance as Kurt. I think he won the best actor for this.
He got best actor.
Deserved. I think he's really excellent. I do think that this one is challenging from me, a modern audience perspective, because it's based on a stage play and it's very much shot like a stage play. Like the scenes are very long. They're very talky. Like you really have to be paying attention. And the cinematography is kind of just very flat. And it's not, especially in the first half, is kind of like not doing a whole heck of a lot for the movie in terms of selling you on the people and that kind of thing. So if you're not really locked in and paying attention, I think it's kind of a hard sell. I think totally worth it for the end sequence. As soon as the blackmail stuff happens, then the movie pops off. But it is like the last 20 minutes of like a 2.5 hour movie or whatever. Not to say that the stuff before it isn't interesting, because I think scripting and performance wise, it is really interesting, but it's a movie that you really have to pay attention to. It is not I'm going to casually scroll the internet while also watching this movie. Yeah,
not a Netflix movie.
Yeah, not a Netflix movie. Like you really have to be ready to sit down and watch this movie or it's not going to be a good time.
Yep. And I think the stage play written by Lillian Hellman, the other one that she had written was The Little Foxes. And I feel like, yeah, that tracks. Like, I can definitely see that. And I think similarly, you got to pay attention in that movie, too.
I think that's true, too. Like, same thing with that is, like, you really have to be ready to watch that movie and really pay attention to it because so much of it is in the dialogue and there's a lot of interesting performance stuff, but the camera is not going to hold your hand and show that to you.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
All right. Anything else to say about Watch on the Rhine?
Nope.
All righty. So our next movie is Madame Curie, which stars Greer Garson as the titular lady physicist, opposite Walter Pidgeon as Pierre Curie. And it follows the couple's budding romance and subsequent marriage while they work to prove the existence of a new element, radium. Though the couple's chemistry is excellent, both Greer and Pidgeon are in fine form as awkward nerds falling in love over their shared experiments. One slowly begins to wonder exactly who this movie is about. Is it really about Madame Curie, the woman at the heart of the scientific work? Or is it about Pierre, her husband, whose point of view we see so much of her through this story from? Is it legitimate to tell a story about a hugely accomplished woman through the eyes of her significant other? Or is Greer Garson's Curie, whose most intense moments of grief we're not even allowed to see, being held at arm's length for other reasons?
Well, to our worries from last time in terms of seeing that Greer Garson was going to be in a movie about Madame Curie and seeing if it was going to be the same sort of wife type role. I will say, as soon as I read the little bit of the description that was available before like hitting play on the movie, it's a famed female scientist fights to keep her marriage together while conducting early experiments. I was like, slow zoom on this. I was like, oh no.
Yeah.
But okay, so I'm kind of down for the scientist cinematic universe in general. Like, I haven't had the same qualms with the Louis Pasteur movies and stuff like that. So I kind of enjoy them. You learn a little bit of science very lightly. But in this case, because so much of Marie Curie's work initially around radiation and these two new elements was done hand in hand with Pierre. Like, I know that she was very much at the forefront and established many of these theories before him. And she had to contend with like, well, I'm going to have to attach his name to stuff anyway, just for legitimacy. And I'm constantly going to be questioned and undercut being like, well, isn't it really Pierre doing this? So to me, it sounds like it was like 80-20. The movie obviously treats it like 50-50. But to be fair, it was both of them working on these things together. So I'm like, okay, it makes sense. But they really do get fairly equivalent time for a movie that is ostensibly supposed to really be focused on her, ideally. So I didn't dislike it. I think it was solid, but yeah, I'm with you. I think it was solid and watchable, right? I think that their chemistry is really charming. I actually think that maybe Greer Garson gets to do more in Mrs. Miniver because she is more of a central character there. But I think that she's very similarly like emotionally inaccessible. But I think she gets a lot to do in that movie in terms of her relationship to her son's fiance and that kind of thing. But I really like Walter Pidgeon in this. He has some really excellent like physical stuff, decision making that he's doing, like in terms of how he's holding his body and how his hands are constantly moving and just how he's moving about the scene. Yeah, he's really excellent. It's really fun to see him in a movie where they've actually bothered to style him because he gets to wear this pointy beard through the whole thing. And honestly, it looks great. The full dastardly villain beard looks great on him.
Wonderful. So I really do like them. And I think that the central relationship there between them is really sweet. And I think that if it were me looking at the story or whatever, I can see why they're like, okay, we're adapting this biography, which was written by Curie's daughter. And the natural thing to be drawn to there is the emotional stuff, right? Where you have like this romance and then you also have the science around it. I think that my problem with it is that so much of this movie is about Pierre's emotions and you get very little of hers. And I think his are still interesting because, again, the performances are really wonderful. But like the point of view of this movie is so focused on how he is experiencing this versus how she's experiencing this. The scene that drives me fully insane is the part where she's supposed to be leaving. She's just graduated. She's supposed to be returning to Poland. And they're visiting his country house. And like that's where he then, like in the middle of the night, he can't stand it anymore. He goes to propose to her while she's in bed. It's very sweet and funny because she's like, you're in my room. I'm in my nightgown. But like we see him pacing in his room. We follow him up the stairs. We follow him into her room. They have their whole scene. We then follow him out of the room. So it's this question of like, who is the main character here? There's no point where the movie cuts back to her alone in the room so that we can see her reaction to it. We follow him into the room. We don't see him come come into the room from her point of view. Or the thing where, so it's a really shocking sequence, but at the end of the movie, he steps out into the street and gets hit and killed by a carriage. And it's really jarring and really well done. But when she gets the news and she's going through his things, the camera is showing all of his things and like stuff, his emotional stuff. And you don't even get to see Greer Garson cry about it.
Yeah.
It's so, I don't know. There's a scene, which I actually think is the best scene in the movie, where they're going back to their laboratory. So she's trying to figure out what she's missing. And it's her realizing that there is something else in this equation, that another element that is affecting this. And like, because of how the movie is framed up until that point, I was so scared that Pierre Curie was going to be the person who figured it out. I was like, if they take away solving this problem from Curie and give it to him, I'm going to be fully out of this movie.
I'm going to riot.
I'm going to riot. I'm going to like stop watching the movie and be like, Sarah, I can't talk about this. not to that extent, because like we're used to that kind of thing at this point. But it was a real fear. So the fact that that doesn't happen is like, oof, okay.
A relief,
a relief. And it actually then makes that scene really excellent. It's also shot really cool. The lighting of how the light is working and that kind of thing, really spectacular. But it's just the simple thing of like, this is not shot from this woman's point of view, even though the movie is essentially about her. That really is so disappointing, because so much of the stuff that's in it is really good. But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's like, whose movie is this? I don't know.
Yeah, like I said, it felt very shared between them. But you're right that so much of the emotional sentimentality and everything and their journey together as people comes from his point of view, versus her stuff is mostly about figuring out the science, which is interesting because when you think about it, the way when he's proposing to her, the way that he describes himself as kind of the more like careful, logical one and her as the more like tenacious, free thinker, you end up getting almost like the opposite of that in the way that their relationship plays out for the rest of it. They just make her a scientist when the movie isn't really about the science. Like they go over a lot of it and the different experiments and stuff, which I think were very fun, the way that they filmed them. Like I loved those. But when it is about more of their like the relationship and the family and the emotion, it's mostly him, which again, when you think about it, also doesn't make sense, because her whole reason for wanting to go back to Poland after graduating was to go take care of her dad. And they just like never even bring that up again. They did not move that man in with them. They're like, whatever, all she cares about is science now, you know, which a lot of the other elements of who she is as a person were kind of taken out. I also read that Marie Curie, she had a sister who she was very close with, not in this movie whatsoever. And she was very devoted to politics and specifically like the liberation and independence of Poland at this time, because during this time it was not independent. It was part of Prussia or something. And so she had other things going on that she cared about other than the science. And it's just none of that is on screen. And maybe there wasn't room for any of that. But I feel like you can work those facets in without the movie like becoming about those things. But it didn't.
I feel like this is really symbolic of my frustration with poor Greer Garson's career, where she's excellent.
She's so good.
Like she's so good. There's some stuff where, it's in the scene where they're realizing that it's got to be like a new, completely undiscovered element that's affecting her experiments.
Yeah.
But when she realizes that there's a fabulous trembling in her voice, like her voice cracks, like she's so good. And they're so good together, honestly. Like it's not,
they really are.
It's not for no reason that they were put in a bunch of movies together, but it's like she just never gets given like the full, her powers are never unleashed.
I know. I hope that one day they are, but it's still not in this movie where she is really supposed to be the main character, right? At least from the title. One day, Greer Garson, hopefully.
Gotta go watch all of Greer Garson's movies and see.
Yeah, just to find a good one.
Maybe not Miss Miniver 2, where they literally kill her off. But.
Absolutely not that one. I know for sure. Might as well just throw that one away. I know you mentioned that this was based on the biography written by one of her daughters. Her other daughter, I found out, Irene Curie, was actually still alive when this movie was made and
lived until like 2007, right?
I think Eve lived until 2007.
Okay, got it.
Because unfortunately, Irene also followed the scientist path, and she and her husband also won Nobel Prize as a couple, so following in her parents' footsteps. But what they discovered was how to make other materials radioactive, induced radioactivity. And so that also, as we know, the radioactivity had affected both Pierre and Marie Curie. It affected Irene and her husband. But another fun fact, so looking at family tree stuff, because someone had posted the family tree of the Curies, because obviously you have some that went the scientist route and then some, like her other daughter Eve, who lived till like 2007 and wrote this book. That was it, or maybe that was her granddaughter. Eve was her daughter, but I don't know how long she lived.
Eve did live until like 2007, like her second daughter did.
Oh, yes, you're right. Because I remember the trivia fact of being like, Eve outlived her father by 101 years.
Crazy.
And it was just like, well, that's insane. Excuse me, but I did the math and it was true. But so looking at their family tree, so her husband died. Marie Curie has a relationship with this man who he was married at the time, so there was scandal around it or whatever. But his grandson went on to marry Marie Curie's granddaughter. And I feel like it was a real smiling through moment where those family trees aligned again. So yeah, it's kind of funny in this movie that like there are other characters, but I didn't even bother really writing most of them down because it's just like it really is just about the two of them and their performances are so fantastic. But they do spend a lot of time with Pierre Curie's family. And there's this one dinner scene early on in their marriage. They don't have any children yet. And the dad literally, so I'm going to quote, he says, "A woman without a child is a parasite. She feeds on life, but doesn't give life back." And I'm like, what is this, Kitty Foyle? Like, what is happening here? Which I know we're not really supposed to agree with him. This is really just a way to show how like crotchety this man is. Howest ever, she is like, actually, I am pregnant. And it's like, yay. So it's not saying that either.
Yeah.
It's just, you know, it was a weird moment.
Like that. And also, before she goes to work in the lab with Pierre Curie and his lab assistant, they're like, women, working with them is terrible. Also, women scientists aren't even hot. And then she shows up and the saving grace is that she's hot.
She's hot. Yeah, so exactly.
Like,
yeah. Yeah. And they take great pains in the opening little sequence to be like, she was brilliant and beautiful. I was like, oh my God.
Well, it's a good thing that she wasn't ugly.
Yes, thank God. Then we wouldn't have discovered these two elements, you know? So stupid. So little things like that. And then I do think in some ways the ending sequence, you know, it's 25 years later where she's giving her speech to whatever scientific board where she's being honored. And I think her final lines, she is essentially saying that she believes that science is the path to a better world, which is just a little awkward when we are firmly in the research phases of the Manhattan Project developing nukes, you know, where it's just like, ooh.
Well, you know.
About that.
She was also, you know, involved in mobile X-ray technology and that kind of thing that did radically like improve lives. But also, we are kind of on the cusp of about to bomb a bunch of people. So,
yes, exactly. Yes, science is the path to a better world, but it is a double-edged sword. Be wise about it. Because even the radiation, you know, at this point where she developed some form of anemia from it, obviously radiation burns, but obviously they found out that radiation, even though it did destroy healthy tissue, it destroys unhealthy tissue faster, including like cancers and stuff. So knowing how to use these things has obviously saved tons of lives, but it's also just like, maybe yes, that, but maybe a little bit of a warning as well in there. You know?
Yeah. Anytime we watch something like this or hear about the science and that kind of thing behind this sort of thing, is I'm always just so surprised that humans are alive.
Yeah.
Where
how did we make it past this point?
We're really making it through via sheer numbers alone, because it's like the radiation thing, it's like equivalent to all the asbestos that we lived with.
Yes.
Where it's like, how are we managing to make it through all this stuff that was just like mindlessly poisoning us? I do appreciate the fact that the movie kind of acknowledges the fact that they knew the thing that they were working with was dangerous, because I feel like as a kid learning about the Curies, it's always like, oh, cool, they discovered radiation, but also it killed them.
Yeah. Like their papers and their research is still in like lead lined boxes.
Yeah, and they're buried in lead coffins, which true, but it wasn't an unwitting thing. Like they weren't just completely unaware. Like maybe at the beginning they were unaware of the fact that it was poisoning them, but it was something that they learned. It was something that Marie Curie knew was a factor. Right. But it's always just that thing of like, oh, Jesus Christ. How are we alive?
How are we still alive? Yeah, even like you mentioning asbestos is there was a scene in the winter and it's snowing. I'm like, that's probably asbestos.
Yeah, probably is
like
asbestos.
this whole movie about radiation, and we know it's a double-edged sword now, and they're breathing in asbestos, and then later it's lead, and now it's microplastics. So.
I mean, it's all sorts of stuff. Like one of my favorite inventions from the Victorian era when they were moving over from gas to electric is they had an electric tablecloth, which had wires run through the tablecloth. So essentially you would have the tablecloth plugged in and a tablecloth on your table, and you could have a lamp that you could just move around the table and it would complete the connection. So you could put the lamp anywhere on the table. You didn't have to plug in the lamp and it would light up. But what this means is that they've got an electrified tablecloth on the table where you're probably eating and drinking food and putting your hands on the table and spilling water onto the table. Like, how?
Yeah. I feel like that's like people like me who don't fully understand certain aspects of the science. Like even here with radiation, I'm like, I'm realizing that I don't fully understand what radiation is at its core. Like I would not be able to devise these like experiments to distill the one element, like they are. Not. And I'm just like, okay, clearly I just watch Cosmos for the vibes. And I feel like it would be the same thing. I'd be like, this is so cool. Look, you could put the light anywhere. And then it's just, it's some of us should not be trusted with this sort of like technology or knowledge, which on that note, I did think the one scene I had the thought like, thank God this wasn't me, but Lord Kelvin makes a cameo appearance in this movie as a character to see the end of their research when they're at the last moment of distilling the radium, right? Ultimately what would be radium from all of the tons and tons and tons of whatever the rock was called where they got rid of all the other elements. And this was like a painstaking process that took years. They had a bunch of little like bowls to evaporate whatever other elements and stuff. Back-breaking, impossible work. And so it's just this one little dish left and it's like just needs to sit overnight. And Lord Kelvin like goes in to look at it and stuff. I'm like, imagine if he broke it.
I thought that too. I was like,
I was so scared. I'm like, I know he doesn't. There's no way that happens. But
imagine he turns too fast and hits the table with his cane and it tips over and everything.
Because I'm kind of a clumsy person, so I wouldn't even want to see it. Like if I were in Lord Kelvin's shoes and they're like, it's behind that curtain, I'll be like, you know what? I better not. You did a lot of work to distill that. Let me see it later, once you do it. But I don't want to be responsible
in case I trip and fall.
Legally, I cannot be within 6 feet of sensitive materials. Like, no, science will be forever ruined and curtailed. Like, imagine just like 5 years or whatever to work just down the drain because of oop, that was my gout acting up at the wrong time or something, and I kind of tripped. So no. Science is cool. I'm down for the scientific cinematic universe, and I just hope they make better science movies as we get further and further along on this journey, which we know they will. There are some great science movies out there.
I love a paperwork movie, and I would like these movies to be more paperworky than
less croquet, more paperwork.
It's my official stance.
Yeah.
All right. Do we have anything else to say about Madame Curie?
Nope.
All right. That takes us to our very last nominee that didn't win. The very last loser. So the Song of Bernadette stars Jennifer Jones as 14-year-old Bernadette, a girl living in poverty with her family in 1858 Lourdes, France. Their lives, along with their neighbors, are turned upside down when Bernadette, a sickly girl with poor religious education, begins to see visions of a radiant woman in a niche above the town's dumping ground. As the local religious fervor threatens to escalate, the civil authorities make it their mission to prove that Bernadette's visions are fraudulent. After all, Lourdes is trying to grow into a respectable place. Being seen as some heretical backwater would be detrimental to the mayor's ambitions for its future. But as the alleged miracles stack up and Bernadette continues to resist retracting her story, those who doubt her are forced to question themselves and their perceptions of reality. Is it possible she really has seen the Virgin Mary?
So this movie looked gorgeous. I just want to say. and I think was really, really carried by a great performance by Jennifer Jones as Bernadette Subiru. And honestly, a lot of the women actors in this were fantastic. I think Anne Revere, who played her mom, was so good. Kind of grappling with how to handle her child who is under all of this scrutiny and having to determine early on to believe her or not, and then later how to kind of protect her from all of this. And then Gladys Cooper as Sister Vosu, who was the nun who was initially her teacher. And then later in that great scene when she's in the convent, like she's kind of the last of the people who don't believe Bernadette. Yeah. So those three, I think, were just so good in this movie, and their individual journeys were
There's
really
also
good.
another woman, and I was going through the cast list and I couldn't find out who it was. I'm sure it's just, there's a lot of women in this movie, actually, which cool.
Yeah, which is nice.
But she's like a prominent figure in the village or something like that. She goes with Bernadette. She walks her back to the siding where she has her first vision so that she can go see her again or whatever. But she's like in a couple scenes and immediately is spectacular. She has a great face, and just something about her performance is like so natural, and she's so good. But you're right. Yeah, there's just a ton of really excellent female performances in this, which is cool to see.
Yeah, super cool to see, especially because none of these are people that we knew beforehand or anything. So they're
this is
just
a real
like
faces
fantastic
movie.
performances.
Like, fantastic performances and like really interesting faces that we don't know them, and are also so counterintuitive to like how we're making movies today in the modern age, where it's like everyone's hot.
Yeah.
There's just it's a good faces movie.
Good faces movie and great cinematography movie.
Yeah.
Like I feel like early on in the village, it's very like How Green Was My Valley reminiscent, just very pastoral. But there were so many shots when she's in the convent at the end where it's just these, cold walls, stark shadows, very sparse surroundings. And there were so many shots that I just kind of wanted to pause and be like, wow, the lighting on so many of these, it just looks so good. And it is such a great juxtaposition to the early scenes, which were obviously more warm and more like rural France. And then, okay, so thinking about, I was a little bit familiar with Bernadette's story because my mom has actually gone to Lourdes to visit that grotto. Yeah, I think it's actually the third most popular
it's like
pilgrimage,
a huge
for a lot
pilgrimage
of
site,
Catholics. Yeah, like it's a huge pilgrimage site. I think in France, it has the most hotels per square mile, second only to Paris, so it is a holy site for many Catholics and for many people who have just heard of kind of like the healing properties potentially, right, of that water.
I read that Emile Zola, so we watched that biopic, went to Lourdes, and so they've got like the healing spring or whatever. They've got public baths there, and he went and was like, "This is disgusting."
That's so funny
because there's just so many people.
Yeah, which I'm sure by now they've really gotten it down to a science. Yeah, it's like Rome and then Jerusalem and then Lourdes. Those are like the three biggest. But yeah, just because, this teenager had these visions. But I think my favorite scene really was the nun talking to Bernadette specifically and being like, well, why you who has had no suffering when I have put myself through so much to be sure that I suffer on this earth. And then when she finds out that Bernadette uncomplainingly has had tuberculosis in the knee and is like actually in extreme pain consistently and has this moment realizing how horrible it was to hold that kind of like jealousy and anger in her heart towards this young girl and finally getting to let that go. Her acting in that scene was just so good, and just like I said, just really great performance. My favorite part of the movie really was a lot to do with the performances early on when Bernadette's mom is talking to her and she's talking about how one day hopefully she'll grow up and she'll get married and she'll have a family of her own, and she says, life goes fast. It's hard to believe how fast. And the delivery from that actress in that moment is like, I believe her. I believe her as a mother. I believe her as a mother to Bernadette. It's just like, there's very, very strong performances.
Yeah, when I saw that we were going to watch this movie, and I do read the 4-sentence what this movie is about. It's not usually like
I
the
go
full
in blind.
summary or whatever.
But this one obviously was easy to know. But
yeah, like you look it up and it's got little Jennifer Jones as 14-year-old Bernadette, like looking, a baby nun.
Baby nun. That cover was painted, or like the poster art that gets used and stuff. That was actually Norman Rockwell who painted.
Oh, really?
So,
fascinating. Yeah. That's great. But, you look it up, and I looked up this movie and was like, oh, God, okay.
Yeah.
Like, I probably should have expected it to be like something different, because at this point, Catholicism in the United States is not the United States version of Catholicism now is you get Catholics who are still very Catholic and like the, you know, the Pope and all that stuff. But then you also have the weird American Catholics who are like starting to
like
get really
evangelical
influenced
Catholics
by
somehow.
the evangelical Catholics. And like so much of my life has been informed by the weird evangelical side of American Christianity and that weird brand of Catholicism that, in combination with kind of the general early Hays Code moralizing that we're running into, I was really dreading having to watch this movie, because it's also long. It's a long movie. And I was just like, oh God, okay, we're going to do 2.5 hours of a Jesus movie at the height of World War II propaganda filmmaking. Got it. But I actually really love this movie.
Nice. Yeah.
The performances are really effective. It kind of does the opposite thing of From Whom the Bell Tolls, which should be absolutely my shit, because I really like wartime drama and like that kind of weird personal stuff where it's like, here's all the weird personal stuff that gets in the way of us accomplishing this thing, but that's actually the important stuff. You have to figure that out before you can go do war, because otherwise, who are you and why are you doing this? But where For Whom the Bell Tolls is so ham-fistedly directed and you are only getting those archetypes, is this does a very opposite thing of like, it would be so easy to, because you're telling basically a religious fable almost at this point, because you've got the good guys and the bad guys, which we must shout out baby Vincent Price, the tallest man in the world.
He was sitting for so many of the scenes, but then when he was actually standing near other people, I was like, this man's a giant.
Unfolds like a heron crane out of a box.
Yeah, pretty much.
But like, it could very easily be this very rote thing. And instead it's like so focused on the humanity of these people that it's actually like very effective. And it even does a thing which I should really hate, which is it gets to the end of this whole story about her seeing visions and lords and like how that affects lords and her neighbors and the people running the town and all that stuff. And then it continues for another 20 minutes as we basically see her in the convent and, you know, we see her ultimately die. And that's a thing where it's like, usually I'm the first person to be like, this movie ended 20 minutes ago and we don't need to see this. But it's really reminding you that actually this wasn't just about the effect on the town or this religious fervor. It really was also still about this girl. So it's important to come back and like see what happened to her.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I had a lot of the same worries going into this movie, especially because I come from a very Catholic family. And that's, you know, it's not a religion that I practice. And so like watching movies like this that are rooted in a lot of, because there are some great stories, not only from the Bible, but also from different figures throughout history, whether they're tied to Catholicism or other, you know, religions. There are great human stories there.
Yeah.
Or like epics, right? You can go one way or the other, because I'm sure we'll see some biblical epics at some point. But with movies like this, I have that little thought in the back of my head of like, okay, I'm trying to enjoy this as a story and a movie and a performance. But then there's that side of me that has to be trying to weigh out people who are treating this as, no pun intended, but like the gospel truth, exactly how it happened. So it took me a bit to really just get to like clear my mind and watch as like a movie and a story and enjoy it.
No, I totally get what you mean too. And I think the thing that actually started to sell me on this movie more than maybe even Jennifer Jones's performance and that kind of thing. Like, she is great, but she's also kind of like doing the innocent 14-year-old girl vibe
for a long time.
For a long time.
Almost the entire movie. Almost until towards the end. Yeah.
But I think the thing that really started to sell me on this movie is the weird government politicking and the church politicking that's happening in the background. So like you've got Bernadette's story, which is all about, you know, innocent faith or whatever, but kind of like happening within that is the story of why local politicians would think that was a bad thing, why the local church is refusing to acknowledge her for so long in terms of not wanting to get embroiled in this. And I love too the thing where she goes to the guy who oversees the local church. I'm now blanking on like the actual title of this man. Sorry to Catholics everywhere. But like he's like, okay, well, prove it to me. If this is real, tell the woman that you're seeing that she has to make the wild rose bloom by the end of February or whatever. And so there's all this surrounding of like, oh, is this going to happen? And then the civil servants guy is like, yeah, but that guy who said that is the only person in this area who probably knows when roses bloom on the regular.
Sure.
So it's this question of, did he set her up to fail? Is it like a plausible deniability thing? There's all this stuff. And there's other things like happening in the movie to suggest no, it really is supernatural. But there's also too that human political element that I was not expecting to find in this movie, and was what won me over ultimately, is the fact that
interesting.
You do have this perspective of the weird power dynamic too of religion in terms of how that gets utilized by the people around it, and not just within the religion, but also outside of it. Kind of the leverage that gives you. It's very aware of that in a way that I wasn't anticipating.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's a good call out. And I do know how rigorously the church investigates things like sightings, things like miracles. There's a lot of red tape around determining holy sites and sainthood and all sorts of stuff. So I liked seeing those elements. And to your point, yeah, I also liked the townspeople trying to like talk her out of early on just her hallucinations or whatever. And I like that. I think it was Vincent Price, I'm pretty sure, who essentially sets it up to be like bad cop, worse cop to scare her out of, you know, not going or whatever. So I liked those scenes. I think there could have been more of those, and I would have like actually enjoyed seeing more of that.
I could have done without Vincent Price being like, oh, you've got throat cancer and you're dying actually.
Yeah, towards the end. Yeah,
leave that part out.
And even if you leave the acting in, take out the internal monologue voiceover and 100%. Just have him going, seeing the crowd slowly, you know, turning towards the grotto and like walking towards the gate and then eventually falling to his knees. I think visually,
the voice acting, the voiceover is not good.
Overkill by far. So I think it was a surprisingly enjoyable movie. I know it was based on, like, obviously it was based on Bernadette's life, but there was specifically a novel by Franz Werfel. It was kind of a historical novel, so it blended both fact and fiction from what was going on in that French village at the time. But the reason that he wrote it was that he and his wife actually escaped from the Nazis, and they hid in that French village in Lourdes, and they were helped by the Catholic Church and the people in the shrine. And so he made a vow that once they were safe, like they were trying to get to the United States, that he would pay it back essentially to Bernadette's story and to Lourdes. And so once he was there, he wrote the book and it was published in 1941. So I think that in and of itself is a really beautiful human story there, but just thought that was cool.
So you know how this movie is really beautiful to look at and captures some really excellent performances. Do you want to know the movies that we've seen by this director whose name I'm now blanking on, but
it's Henry King. I know one of them, but I want to hear you tell me more because I remember being shocked. So
I mean, the one that's I'm going to mention is probably the one that also shocked you, but because he also directed State Fair.
State Fair. I know. I was like, what? What? I don't understand. I don't understand. Was this
I don't get it.
Or do we need to revisit State Fair and maybe it's actually good?
No, we really don't need to revisit State Fair. We truly do not need to do that.
Yeah. No, we don't. No, okay. We'll let it
here's the other Henry King movie that we've watched. Okay. Or I'm sorry, there's two more. So all right. In Old Chicago.
Oh my, but okay.
And then the other one is Alexander's Ragtime Band.
Oh no.
However, also looking at his other movies, there's another movie on here that I know we'll watch later that I love.
Okay.
So part of me is wondering, I'll need to go back and see like which studios made these.
Yeah, I was going to say, did he change studios or something? Yeah,
I'm kind of curious because he has this run of bad movies. We're just going to put it on that. Like this Alexander's Ragtime Band, State Fair, and In Old Chicago are among the movies that I would say like absolutely just don't watch.
Some of the worst movies that we've watched, genuinely. Yeah. So
honestly. So were those just like gun for hire studio things where he got hired at a particular studio? And like, we know we've seen this before, right? Where it's like a director will make something really cool and then go make something that like just turbo sucks and seems like they don't care about it at all. And I don't think that's uncommon because directors are making a billion movies for the studios under a particular contract. Just like an actor didn't necessarily have complete control over what movie that they were going to be in, as directors also just kind of got handed stuff and told, you're directing this movie. So I don't know. I need to look to see if it's a studio change or what, because it is insane.
You know how I put movies that I really love in a bucket to choose for our top 5 episodes? I also have a bucket for our Anthony Adverse Award, and all 3 of those movies are in that bucket. So,
and I'm just looking at this other movie that I know I'm almost positive we're going to watch it, and I'm like, that movie rips. Like, what the hell?
What movie is it? I want spoilers.
It's 12 O'Clock High.
I don't know what that is. It sounds like a Western.
It's not a Western, but
thank God.
kind of similar vibes. It's about aviators during early bombing raids over Germany. So
interesting. Okay. Yeah. Well,
it stars Gregory
Peck. It's one of your
Peck.
Favorites?
Yeah,
I know the name, but I don't know.
It's really excellent. I think it's maybe not like one of my favorite movies ever, but I think it is. It's up there. It's really good.
Nice. Yeah, and then this movie was like the most nominated movie this year. It was nominated for like 12 categories, and I think it won 4 of them. So cinematography being one of them, which I think was good. Also best scoring, which I think was also earned, because that's the thing I forgot to mention. The score in this was really lovely, and it didn't hit you over the head like Max Steiner, which, sorry, Max Steiner.
He truly puts too much pepper on it.
You never are unsure if it's Max Steiner or not. You always know.
Max Steiner out here like silence is the enemy.
Yeah. Well, but that's it, I think, for our losers of this year, which means that we now get to go on and watch the winner of this year, which has been highly, highly anticipated, Casablanca.
From watching Casablanca. Before Sarah and I get to yapping, I'm going to do a quick summary of the movie so that we're all on the same page. If you haven't seen Casablanca, it's like an hour and 42 minutes long. Just go watch the movie, then come back to us after. That said, the year is 1941. The place is Casablanca in French Morocco. There, a disparate cast of French and German officials, refugees desperate to escape the war to still neutral United States, and various scoundrels and opportunists all gather in Rick's American Cafe. The club owner, you'd never guess it, but his name is Rick, claims to be politically neutral, nay, some might even say politically disinterested, although the city's unabashedly corrupt police captain Renault and the Nazi officers visiting Casablanca are well aware that he previously had a history of revolutionary anti-fascist activity. When a local petty crook, Ugarte, passes off stolen letters of transit before promptly being arrested, Rick finds himself not just holding hot documents, but also being drawn back into a life he was determined to leave behind. It turns out that Ugarte was meant to pass the letters of transit to famed anti-Nazi resistance leader Victor Laszlo and his beautiful wife, none other than Ilse Lund, with whom Rick once shared a romance while the two were in Paris. Their brief but passionate relationship came to an abrupt end the day the Germans came to occupy the city, when Ilse suddenly left him without a word and forced Rick to leave the city alone and brokenhearted, rendering him into the cold cynic we see today. Initially, Rick refuses to sell Laszlo the letters of transit and tells him to ask his wife why. Any attempts at further negotiation Laszlo might try is cut short when the visiting German Major Strasser, having come to Casablanca to guarantee Laszlo can't take his anti-fascist activities to the US, where he might attempt to sway the world from neutrality, begins to loudly lead his fellows in a German anthem in the crowded club. Laszlo orders the house band to play La Marseillaise and leads the rest of the cafe's crowd into drowning out the Germans. Afterward, Strasser has Renault close the club on a flimsy pretext in an attempt to quash any potential anti-German sentiment. That night, as Laszlo leaves to attend an underground meeting of local resistors, Ilse secretly returns to Rick's to try and convince him to hand over the letters. When that doesn't work, she tries to hold him at gunpoint for them, but ultimately can't bring herself to shoot him. She reveals she still loves him and that when they met in Paris, she had believed her husband had already been killed while attempting to escape from a Nazi concentration camp. When she learned that Laszlo was alive, however, she left Rick without explanation to nurse her husband back to health. Rick's cold exterior crumbles and he agrees to help. He agrees to give Laszlo the letters of transit so that he can leave Casablanca, and Ilse will stay with him here. When Laszlo shows up unexpectedly at the club, the resistance meeting having been raided by police, Rick distracts him while Ilse can slip away unseen. Laszlo, knowing that Rick loves Ilse, tries to persuade him to use the letters of transit to take her away to safety. Unsurprisingly, Strasser and the local police finally arrest Laszlo on false charges with the understanding that he either returned to Germany and likely be returned to a concentration camp or probably be executed here in Casablanca. Rick persuades the police captain Renault to release him, promising to set up Laszlo for a much more serious crime, possession of the stolen letters of transit. However, when Renault makes good on the plan, Rick forces him at gunpoint to help them escape to the airfield. On the tarmac, Rick reveals to Ilsa he isn't leaving. She has to go with Laszlo to America because she'd regret it forever if she stayed here with him. She ultimately chooses to leave with her husband. When the plane is preparing to take off, Major Strasser arrives to stop it, but is shot by Rick before he can recall it. Despite having witnessed the murder, Renault sends the policeman who arrives shortly after on a wild goose chase so that he and Rick can escape into the fog of the evening, walking out of Casablanca and into a future of resisting fascism. And that's Casablanca. So what are our thoughts?
Okay, so the movie was great. It's one of the greats for a reason. Pretty much from start to finish, I feel like the pacing is really perfect and it presents all of the pieces pretty early where it's like, okay, the audience knows, or maybe, I don't know. I don't know how much of it is because I knew the ending in advance, but I will say parts of the ending, because the main thing that I knew was more of the stuff that gets referenced in terms of his relationship with Ilsa and how he does send her off and they have their like kind of farewell and stuff on the plane. I didn't really know about all of the consistent undercurrents between Claude Rains as the French captain and Conrad Veidt as the German major there. I didn't know that those were like consistent tensions over this supposed neutral place. So once they left on the plane, I was like, wait, so what happens after this? Like, it's obviously a very brief scene and stuff, but didn't know that the German major gets shot. And then that creates like this opportunity for Claude Rains, who has wonderfully played just the skeeziest kind of self-serving French captain in this whole thing, to also have a bit of an about face and be like, you know what, I too will no longer be a scoundrel. The things at stake are pretty huge and let's do this together. And then of course the famous closing line, I was like, oh yeah, that's where this is from.
Sure.
So I loved it. I think there's a lot to talk about in the movie. Humphrey Bogart's performance especially is iconic. What a character. Not too dissimilar from how we saw him in The Maltese Falcon as Sam Spade. A little bit world weary, a little bit cunning, but here I feel like, I don't know, it felt more grounded, a little bit more
He's
realistic.
Less cool.
Yeah.
And like temperature wise than he is in Maltese Falcon, in terms of like you can really feel a lot of things bubbling under the surface with Rick versus his character in Falcon is very, like, very like chilly.
Yeah. Versus here, as Claude Rains as Captain Renault continues to point out, is like, I'm pretty sure you're a sentimental man, so they're like all of these things under the surface that shows that he actually cares a great deal and is just trying not to. And then just what a crazy reminder, because again, the war is not over at the time that this is filming, at the time that this is releasing. So many scenes in this, they hit hard now, but even more so, I feel like I think it technically had a limited release end of 1942 and then a wide release in 1943. And it's just like the scene in the bar where the Germans take over the piano for a bit. And then Victor Laszlo starts the La Marseillaise, the French, like yay, pro-France sort of sound. And like everyone in the bar stands up and starts singing it. One hits crazy hard. Like I actually teared up a little bit.
Yeah.
And it's not even, we're not even in the middle of World War II at this point.
Yeah, we in fact know that the Nazis lose World War II versus like,
we know the ending. Yeah, we know the spoilers.
Like, what's going to happen? We don't know.
Right. And just like that resistance and standing up to it. And it was beautiful, especially knowing that a lot of the extras in that scene were refugees from Europe, by that point too. So hits really close to home. And I think I had read that it was inspired by the scene in The Grand Illusion where the French prisoners of war sing that song in the camp, So I was like, oh yeah, that totally tracks. So yeah, I don't know. Powerful scene. I think it stands as a great marker for like when it was made and the significance there, but also even just as a movie, we love to see a world-weary person actually like give in to his better nature.
Right. Yeah, I know you'd said you hadn't seen this since you were like a kid. I've definitely seen it as an adult human. So a lot of those things are things I had already kind of been aware of, but just in addition to all that stuff, the movie's just so thoughtfully produced. It's like really beautifully made, looks terrific. All the performances are great. Also, what a refreshing change after For Whom the Bell Tolls, which like this shares so much of the DNA of that in terms of like a cynical guy, even more so than Gary Cooper's character in From Whom the Bell Tolls, because he's kind of eschewed politicism or attempted to, even though very specifically there are characters that are essentially like you can't be neutral. I think there's a line that says isolation is no longer a practical policy, where it's like the only people who have the essentially luxury of doing that are so far removed from the conflict as to be able to make that decision versus everyone else has to take a stand somewhere. So he's even farther removed than Gary Cooper's character and From Whom the Bell Tolls, who is doing his duty or whatever. But similar concepts in terms of the intergroup politics of who's going to win out on this. Humphrey Bogart weirdly kind of playing the character of Pablo, except from Pablo's perspective, essentially. But also Ingrid Bergman is here, who is also in, she gets so much more to do. Her character is excellent. Ilsa's really cool in terms of how she's developed and the agency that's given to her and the complex nature of her feelings. It's such a refreshing take to see after so many of these other movies, especially that one where it's just like, oh my God.
Yeah. And I think I remember reading, but hopefully someone fact check me on this because we just watched it, so I didn't have enough time to research all this. But I think I remember reading that parts of like the script were determined as they were filming, and the flashback sequences in Paris were actually among the first that they filmed. And so Ingrid Bergman had asked the director, Michael Curtis, like, well, how should I kind of play this in terms of, you know, who she's ultimately in love with? Is she really in love with Rick, etc.? And at the time, he was just kind of like, well, play it in the middle, because they really also still didn't know how everything was going to play out. But I think that speaks so much to ultimately like what the character has to grapple with, because she has kind of like a different love for both of them. And one was youthful and idealistic, and like recognizing that Victor Laszlo as an idea is so important to these causes. But even as a person, like there's so much respect there versus obviously with Humphrey Bogart, there was more of a whirlwind romance, right? That kind of helped her
like
find peace, right? Like passion, but also finding peace after she thought she lost her husband, right? So having to kind of grapple with all that. So I feel like her character, the way that she plays it, really captures a lot of that in between. And it could go either way in terms of, does she stay? Does she go? Does she want to stay? Does she want to go? And ultimately, she's just trying to do the right thing. You know, there's like a recognition of what is the right thing to do in the grand scheme of things and what is the thing I want to do. And like that push and pull between those two things, which is something that Humphrey Bogart as Rick also then grapples with, right? And makes that decision. So I was like, this is even just as like a movie with the drama, it's so good. And what a stacked cast in general too.
Yeah,
like
truly.
Claude Rains and Conrad Veidt as their like perspective leaders in like the French army versus German army. And then who else? There was someone else. Oh, Peter Lorre. Like, we have to call Peter Lorre out. Love seeing him. Just so sad what ends up happening to him in this movie, because he was so close to getting out of the whole, you know, racket
Never
that he kind of had.
Retirement.
Exactly. I was like, oh no, that's a death flag, Peter. Why'd you do? And you gave him the papers. You're toast. You're so toast.
The only thing he could have done worse is to show us a picture of like his girlfriend.
Exactly. And be like, no, I don't smoke these cigarettes anymore. My girlfriend wants me to stop, you know. And it's like, oh, you're so gone, you're a goner. But he was great in his small part in this. And then of course, like, we have to call out Sam, you know, the piano player through this. And I always thought the main song, As Time Goes By, I always thought that was a Louis Armstrong song.
Oh, so sure.
Found out, and I think he's done covers of it and stuff. But
yeah, I would assume so.
But yeah, Sam played by, who was the actor?
Dooley Wilson.
Dooley Wilson. Yeah. First of all, extremely talented as a musician. Second of all, also great acting as this unfortunate third wheel and third party perspective to the romance that they had in Paris. And then knowing that it's like, this should not be rekindled. The last that he had seen of everything, it was that really tear jerking scene being left at the station in the rain. And he's just like, I don't remember that song. I don't remember that song. Don't make me play that song.
Leave me out of it. Leave me out of it.
Exactly. But he keeps getting, dragged into it. But
I think you mean wheeled into it as the poor piano gets moved around.
That's true. And he also is the third wheel. So he gets wheeled into it in so many ways. But loved him essentially trying to be the anti-wingman. And I feel like many of us have kind of been in that position where you have a friend who's making a bad decision and you're just trying to be like, don't do it. We can go, let's go do something. What does he say? He's like, we can go fishing for the whole day, like essentially until they leave. Let's do some distracting. Right. So it's just like, oh, Sam. It's a lost cause. We know that this is a train that has already left its station and is barreling towards its destination. So yeah, I loved all of the characters in this. And I can definitely see why, as a 9-year-old, I wouldn't have followed this movie.
Sure.
Because it's not just about the romance. Because a reminder, like some of the movies too that I watched when I was younger that my mom really loves. I watched, Wuthering Heights with her. I watched Gone with the Wind. And then I watched this movie. So there is like this kind of dramatic core romance to all of these things. But this one of those three is very much the more nuanced and determined by what is going on in the world and around them, rather than just these are two dramatic people who have a very, like I said, whirlwind and or toxic romance. So I'm like, yes, this movie way over my head as a child.
Yeah.
But definitely as an adult, I'm like, it's just really, really good from start to finish. I cared about what was going on in terms of everything going on with the visas, the different players at work, this being kind of unoccupied France, knowing more about all of the context. Yeah, like perfect setting for all of this and everything going on with the romance. It wasn't just like one part of the movie is good. It was all good. Like I cared about all of it.
I think it's really fascinating that this movie, like in terms of popular culture now, really kind of gets boiled down to the romance and the here's looking at you kid thing.
Sure. Which great line, to be fair, but yeah.
Oh yeah, to be fair. And again, it is excellent. But I think the weird thing that gets lost in that when we are only talking about the romance is it kind of glazes over Rick's coming back to caring about this existential fight that's happening here, right?
Yeah.
When you start to discard the politics, it starts to completely flatten that in a way that it does the movie a disservice. But
absolutely,
I understand why that's how we got here, but I'm like, we should really be talking more about the politics of Casablanca because they're they're the thing that make the romance in this compelling, but B, it's that weird thing of like, I guarantee that there are so many people of an older generation that are like, Casablanca is such an important movie. It was like one of my favorite movies or whatever, but they're not thinking about the actual politics or parallels of that movie, like what it's actually saying versus just a cool story about these characters.
No, 100%.
Like, I don't know, Victor Laszlo MVP.
Yeah, like starting the resistance song in there. And also while he's being tailed, he's like, what am I going to do? Just sit here and rot? Like, I have to keep doing my best for the cause, and goes to an underground meeting. That same sort of putting yourself at risk consistently for this, as you said, existential threat that's going on at the time. And I think in terms of what we talked about with the nominees, this also encapsulates a lot of that self-sacrifice and get your hands dirty, right? Because you're foregoing your own happiness because unfortunately the world is not such a place currently where you can really get to just indulge in that. And then in the case of, I keep wanting to call him Sam Spade because they're both such like basic names, in there, but Rick in this literally killing the German major to literally getting his hands dirty and, foregoing his chance with the woman he loves, knowing that it would end potentially also violently for both of them, and protecting her and everything was just like, it's so integral even to their romance, the world that they are inhabiting. So I thought that was really, really well done and not something that I was expecting. I wonder though, in terms of how it's remembered, if they had more quotable line about that, because what Rick says as he's telling Ilsa to get on the plane, and I wrote this down because it starts out really strong and then I think it loses it, and it could have been one of those quotes with staying power that encapsulates that theme of the movie in terms of its politics. But he says, the problems of three little people don't amount to a hill of beans in this crazy world. And I was like, if you had chosen like something else other than a hill of beans, you know, I think there's like definitely a good thought and kernel in there about just like, yeah, we're just three people in these intense times and stuff. You could have like formed a good quote there, but it just that a hill of beans is not going to have staying power. I don't think in a movie like
It's so funny because like this gets into the production side of things, but the script was written, I think, like kind of you alluded to earlier, where they had kind of like started shooting already before they even really knew where the movie was going. The script was nominated for Best Original Screenplay, and even the people who worked on it were like, really? Okay.
All right. Okay.
I'm pretty sure that they actually won, and which is delightful. I think it deserves it. Bring back movies where everyone is a sassy little bitch.
Yes. It did. It won Best Screenplay. For sure.
Good. Some other production stuff that I know from like the night of the Oscars. So Casablanca had been out a long time because of the thing that you alluded to, where it got an early release and then a wider release. So it had kind of had time to like cook, basically. So a lot of people had seen it. So in addition to the fact that this, I think you said this was the first time that the Oscar ceremony was at the Chinese theater. Yeah. So kind of more of a public event. So Humphrey Bogart got basically mobbed by fans on the way in, which was like the first time that had happened to him. And apparently the guy who produced this, Hal Wallace for Warner Bros., who was like the head of production, was like, I guess he had to fight with Jack Warner, who was the head of the studio, to actually cast Humphrey Bogart as a romantic lead. So he was like, heh. And then Bogart didn't win Best Actor.
Yeah, because Paul Lucas from Watch on the Rhine.
Michael Curtis, I know, won Best Director, and apparently he'd been nominated twice before for Best Director and had speeches prepared, but this time he was like, it's not happening, so he didn't have a speech prepared. So he showed up and was like, oh God, what was the quote? 1 second. So Michael Curtis was Hungarian, and apparently he didn't speak perfect English. So the quote is, "So many times I have a speech ready, but no dice. Always a bridesmaid, never a mother. Now I win. I have no speech." So he won. And then when Casablanca won Best Picture, apparently, so again, Hal Wallace had been like really instrumental in getting this movie made. Like he'd produced it. He stood up to go up to the stage, and then Jack Warner jumped up, ran to the front, and accepted the trophy and gave the speech. And Hal Wallace couldn't get out of his seat because the Warner family was like surrounding him essentially. So he couldn't get up there, and apparently it stewed his beans forever, and he eventually left Warner Brothers.
Dang. What a big moment to snatch from him. That's so messed up. So yeah, I'm glad it won for screenplay. I also saw that there was a dialogue person specifically, and I'm like, I hope they got a shout out, because the dialogue will always have Paris, you know, Louis, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship, as like
literally
a perfect
every
ending line
that Renault has is
Oh yes, when he's like, I've got my gun aimed at your heart, and he's like, oh, that's my least vulnerable spot. You know, it's like, it's so good. Every line is so good, which is why I'm so sad they dropped it on the one line with the hill of beans, because that could have been a great line too.
I mean, I think I've definitely heard that line quoted and that kind of thing. I think it's one of those aphorisms that has kind of fallen out of favor.
Yeah.
So it's something I think that was probably more relevant at the time, but is now.
Yes, it's just unfortunate, because it's like sometimes those things stand the test of time, or they make a comeback, and then sometimes in the future things just sound silly, and it's like you wouldn't have been able to anticipate that in any way. But it's just like, dang, a hill of Bush's baked beans. You know? But no, I thought this was it was a beautiful movie, because I had to check like what was it that won cinematography over this, and it was The Song of Bernadette, which I'm like, what a hard choice. I think
they're two very different schools of thought, right? Where it's like, this has a very like modern sensibility, especially in terms of how it's being lit. There's so many really excellent night shots of streets down through windows, that kind of stuff. A really great sense of place, versus Song of Bernadette is very, I don't even want to say theatrical, but it has more of a artificial quality to it. Yeah. Even though I'm fairly positive 90% of Song of Bernadette, anytime they're outside, that's legitimately outside. That's not on a soundstage or anything like that. Some of the house sets obviously are a soundstage, but generally is in a more, frankly, natural environment than this movie is. But because I'm sure all of this, or the vast majority of it, is sets.
Yeah, it is. And I think they reused a lot of sets also from other Warner Brothers movies.
Yeah, for sure. But yeah, it's two very different schools of thought in terms of how to shoot a movie. And I think, at least for for probably especially for us, like a modern audience, this way of shooting Casablanca is clearly part of the DNA of noir and that kind of thing, which has really long-term informed how we shoot movies even today.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I think it feels more contemporary just because I think the styling of it is
it's
something
like more familiar.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes sense. And I know it is in terms of noir, like it's the same cinematographer that did the Maltese Falcon. So that makes sense. It's such a cool style that it's hard for me as a modern viewer, I guess, not only familiarity, but I'm like, it just looks really cool and dynamic. And you get such great shots. Like when he's drinking himself into a stupor, essentially, and you get the closing in on him being obviously Humphrey Bogart in this. And you can see just like all of the fine details of his face and just what perfect acting too. I'm like, I believe that he is drunk and miserable and that he's thinking about Paris. You know, like, it was just, it's so good. So good. And the lighting also impeccable. And I do have to also just talk about, I feel like the music and the score.
I was going to go there
Steiner,
next.
Okay. He was a little too powerful at times, but I feel like this is the first movie that we've seen that integrates diegetic music, because so much of this takes place in the saloon and stuff. So, right, we've had those types of performances woven into other movies, but Max Steiner also takes parts of As Time Goes By to create an orchestral refrain from those. And so it's like the music is actually important to the characters, it's important to the setting, and the score builds on that and actually integrates it. So this is the first time that I think the full scoring and music of a movie that also feels much more familiar to modern audiences, where it's in the world, but it's also a great soundtrack.
Yeah.
Mwah. It was very good.
Yeah, that recurring leitmotif of the song that Sam plays showing up in the score is really lovely, especially when Ilsa shows up in the middle of the night, essentially, to demand the visas from Rick. It's so good.
Yep. So good job, Max Steiner. This time I was a little worried with the opening credits sequence because he went heavy on that one. I was like, let's lower the volume a little bit. Like, it was still good.
Someone out there must have been like, no, Max, we can't put a song in this scene. So maybe someone's
he's not as bad
him.
as whoever was the music behind Anthony Adverse. He's not quite at that level.
Right.
But he, once again, as we said earlier, you always know when it's Max Steiner because the scores are, it's not that they take away from the scene a lot of times, but I feel like they share importance with the scene instead of becoming part of it, if that makes sense.
No, it does. It's something like over top of the scene oftentimes instead of supporting it.
Exactly. Yeah. But he did it definitely a little better this time. So good job. Good job, Max.
Oh, gosh. What else is there to say about... Here's the thing about Casablanca, right? Is that a million people have talked about it. Everyone kind of knows it. I think it's statistically one of the most written about movies other than
probably
Citizen Kane and Gone with the Wind and Birth of a Nation, I'm guessing, is the other one because it's, divisive. There's a lot to talk about there, right? So it's like... I'm not going to say don't go watch Casablanca. Like, that's not going to be the hot take.
Right. There's going to be basically no hot takes here. Just like, damn, everyone was right.
Yeah. Sometimes, actually, a movie that everyone tells you is a masterpiece is, in fact, a masterpiece, and you should watch it, unfortunately.
Yes. Yeah. And this is kind of one of those. I will say, and I don't know what the intention would have been otherwise, because I think it works so well for the script and the characters and the messaging. But obviously, with the Hays Code, there's no way that Ilsa would have been able to stay with Rick, because then that's like extramarital, that this is now an affair. The way they got it past the censors in the first place, obviously, was her believing that her husband was dead. And now it becomes a very difficult burden to kind of navigate through and stuff. So it's kind of interesting to think like, okay, if the Hays Code hadn't been a thing at this point and the ending could have gone whatever way, I wonder if the writers still would have chosen the same ending for these characters or not. It feels like a no-brainer that this is the correct way to handle it. But I think it's just because it is now so iconic and part of what gives it such staying power that it's hard to imagine it, not being a very bittersweet, powerful ending.
I think it's vital, actually, for Bogart's character that they separate.
Yeah. Because then it's like, yeah, now he's getting back involved with everything. And
yeah, exactly. Like, he's getting back involved in everything. But I think that because of the fact that he spends so much of this movie essentially playing the antagonist to their attempt to leave Casablanca, is I think the growth for him is surrendering that.
Right.
Of growing past that and being like, no, this is the better thing for you. Even though we love each other, this is the correct thing to do.
Yeah.
So I think Hays Code or no Hays Code, I think it's vital to his character to have her leave.
Yeah.
And not just have her leave, but to send her away.
I agree. I
Yeah.
just don't know if writers always do the thing that's more powerful.
Sure,
You know? So potentially a version of that where it ends up the other way. I don't think it would have had nearly as much staying power by far, but yeah.
Not to defend the Hays Code, because I would never.
Yeah.
There's something really fascinating about the stories that get told when you have a very specific framework that you are forced to operate within. Again, it's not a good thing. People should be able to have the flexibility, and censorship is not good. But the parameters of whether it's the Hays Code saying specifically you can't do XYZ, or even something as simple as these are the budgetary restrictions that we have for this indie horror movie or whatever, the limitations sometimes create really interesting stories that wouldn't necessarily be possible otherwise, or you wouldn't arrive at otherwise. So I think that there is something to be said for the indomitable spirit of humanity's willingness to like tell weird stories or specific stories is so impressive.
I think obviously constraints can lead people to, well, you have to find creative solutions, right? Sometimes, but still, at what cost?
Yeah.
You know?
Again, not defending the Hays Code.
Yeah, but not to also say that absolutely no good came out of, obviously, that era. There are a ton of
I'm honestly surprised that they let them kiss. And not only that, but like they kiss and then it has a very abrupt cut.
Fade to black.
Yeah. Like, Yeah. I mean, everyone's still wearing the same clothes. No one's hair's mussed, but there's a firm cut there. So,
but squint and read in between the lines. I think, and I don't know if this was just a made up rumor or not, but there was a proposed sequel. I don't think it ever got past planning stages or anything, but surprised. Allegedly it was about Ilsa's child who would have been the age from when they left Casablanca. So then to like further imply that was Rick and her child from that moment, you know, but obviously it was never made. And I'm like, it just sounds like a bad movie also. Like, I'm just glad Hollywood wasn't the like sequel making machine that it is now. And I guess then again, it's never too late ultimately. So there's still time, I guess, for Casablanca too, if anyone wants to make that.
Okay, don't give anyone ideas. They're going to remake Casablanca. Who would star in the Casablanca remake?
Oh, no. Timothy Chalamet. Can you imagine? Oh, there'd be a lot of people angry about that. I feel like he's in so many movies right now. Okay, so who do we have to cast? We cast Humphrey Bogart, Ingrid Bergman, Claude Rains, and Conrad Veidt.
Yeah, and who plays Laszlo?
Oh, Paul Heinrich.
I feel like whoever we cast as Humphrey Bogart is going to be like a really telling tonal decision.
Right.
My immediate thought is Chris Pratt.
Oh, no. Oh, I hate it. Okay, so Ingrid Bergman. So Ilsa.
Rebecca Ferguson.
Okay. I could actually kind of see Rebecca Ferguson as Ilsa.
Yeah, I'm imagining Rebecca Ferguson trapped in a movie with Chris Pratt, though.
Oh, yeah, I know. It'd be one of those movies where it's like, I'm so sorry that you have to act counter to that. Oh, Rob Pattinson could play Conrad Veidt's character, I feel like.
Oh, there we go. Perfect.
Yeah,
I feel like he doesn't
Robert
have
Pattinson.
the physical presence for that, though.
Really?
Yeah, Rob Pattinson tends to play a little worm.
True. But he was the Batman. So
that's true. But he was still a little worm Batman, though.
I haven't seen it, but I believe it.
I mean, great movie. It's absurdly long. And yeah, I will say I enjoyed all 3 hours of it. So
nice. I feel like I could much better cast a 90s version of this where like Sandra Bullock is Ilsa.
Oh my God.
Bruce Willis would be Humphrey Bogart. Sandra Bullock would be Ilsa.
100%.
Tom Cruise as Victor Laszlo.
We're really ending this on a cursed note here.
Yeah. Maybe we just cut this. Maybe we just don't do like Casablanca remake or anything.
We got to get away from this. It's too dark.
It's too dark. It's too dark. It was a great movie. Never remake it. It's perfect the way that it is. And yeah, those are, I think we're ready for our recommendations, is what it feels like.
Yeah.
Like if we're going that far down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, I think it's time.
Can we add anything new to Casablanca discourse?
No, I think that's the thing. It's like just Google Casablanca Criterion essay. You'll find the one where I discovered all these facts about the Oscars ceremony, but I'm sure there's 1,000 other great things to read.
Yeah,
that frankly, someone else has done a lot of really smart research and hasn't had to react to this movie immediately after watching it in the way that we have.
Yeah, still fresh. Fresh.
So I think that there's still like great takeaway from us talking about it. But if you really wanted to do a deep dive into Casablanca, I think if you haven't watched it, obviously watch it first. But then, go find the smarter people who have like actually written essays about this and done the research and not just watched it today.
Published cinematic discourse.
Yeah.
But what a great movie to end this episode on, though, in terms of like, I'm looking at the list so we can do our recommendations, and I was like, definitely ending on a high note. That's always nice with the winner. But Abby, do you want to give your recommendations?
I'm going to say the Oxbow Incident, the Song of Bernadette, and Casablanca.
It's a light year.
I maybe watch on the Rhine, but again, like kind of the thing that I talked about is I think you have to really be prepared to watch that movie.
Yeah.
That one's like challenging from just a watching level. That I think there's other things that you could spend your time on.
That's fair. I think for me, definitely the Oxbow Incident. That movie blew me away. Was not expecting that whatsoever and really loved it from start to finish. It's also an easy watch. It's a quick watch. Very tense throughout. Yeah, like again, under 90 minutes. Just watch it. It's so good. The More the Merrier. I'm going to go with like a super light recommendation. If you want to see more classic Hollywood romantic hijinks, Three's Company sort of vibes, then watch that one. If you're not trying to watch all of those, then I think just watch Talk of the Town instead from last year. Madame Curie, I actually do also lightly recommend. Like I said earlier, I'm down for the scientist cinematic universe. I think it was a solid movie. I learned some science. Greer Garson is wonderful, even if they underutilized her. And I think I liked Walter Pidgeon best in this movie out of all the movies that we've seen him in.
100%.
So I think recommendation there, but especially if you are into science or biopics or Greer Garson or Walter Pidgeon, then that'll be a stronger recommendation for you. Song of Bernadette, also surprisingly, I do recommend. Like I said, it took me a second to like really just get into it and appreciate it as a movie, but it's beautiful, look gorgeous. I will say, to me, it felt a little long, but there were some really wonderful performances, and I think the story as a whole was a good one. And then Casablanca, yes, of course, like that to me is basically a must watch. So that and Oxbow Incident are probably my strongest recommendations this year. Now for the winner, Abby, who would you have voted for the best picture in 1943?
I mean, I think they got it right. I think really, it's beautifully produced, wonderfully acted, but I think the immediacy, like the time frame in which it is made, the year in which it got made and nominated and released, it is so contemporary to the things that are going on in that period in a way that like I can't even imagine, because the fact that we make movies so much more slowly now. We're never going to see a movie that's like about a thing that is essentially happening right this second. With the exception of maybe, the war in Iraq went on long enough that we could make movies about it while it was still happening. Womp womp. But for the most part, the immediacy with which this is speaking to the current time period, the fact that it is kind of in a way speaking to so much of what Hollywood has been doing for the last couple of years in terms of shielding their eyes and turning their head away from what is happening, and not just Hollywood, but essentially the United States in general, is it feels like this is maybe like a too big pat on the back for them to be like, well, now we've kind of turned around on this and now we're going to reward ourselves for this is how we've always been and this is how we always will be. But I think that there is still something powerful about a movie that is essentially choosing to no longer be neutral in a time with what's going on overseas. So I think, absolutely, Casablanca.
totally agree. I think Casablanca was the right choice, even though I came into this like Oxbow incident. But I was like, Casablanca is too good and too perfect for the times that it was made in. Not to say that Oxbow incident didn't have some of that too, as we talked about with like the dangers of mob mentality and stuff. But this was set in the war. It's impacted by the war, these lives affected by that. And to your point, Abby, when talking about that kind of like US staying neutral for too long, that is what I thought of too in the scene again, where Rick is drinking himself into a stupor and he asks Sam, what time is it in New York? And Sam's like, my watch is broke. Like, I have no idea, sir.
Right.
But then Rick is like, oh, they're probably sleeping in New York. They're probably sleeping in all of America. And it's kind of like both obviously literal in terms of the time difference. But to me, it also felt like a specific callback to that lingering push for neutrality and isolationism that lasted way too long into the war, which then also reflects Rick's own desire through all of this to stay neutral as well, right? And which all eventually reaches that turning point in the end. So I think it, perfectly encapsulated the times that it was in. The message, I think, was a strong one, both for people who may have been reluctant to get into the war before seeing kind of what was at stake, for refugees who had fled Europe, who are both in the movie and potentially in theaters around the world watching it. There's so many beautiful, beautiful scenes that speak to actually doing something. And the story was just good on top of it. So I think absolutely deserved the win. Kind of no contest.
Yeah. And something that we kind of didn't talk about, but just occurred to me as you're talking about it, is the importance that Casablanca kind of puts on all these little stories that are also happening in the background. You get this really interesting multicultural thing going on, just A, because the setting is so varied, but B, you've got all of these different people within this area, but not just as background players. So you've got the whole Rick, Ilsa, Laszlo, Renault main drama going on, but you also have all of these people who are working in the club, the guitar player or the steward who is running around. Even you see a couple smaller stories with refugees going through this area, trying to like get their visas, like the Hungarian couple, right? I think they're Hungarian.
It was Bulgarian, I think.
Yeah, Bulgarian. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. Or there's another couple talking to the steward and they're leaving. And so you're getting all of this texture, but those stories, even though they're not necessarily like the story or the main plot, they still have importance. So it's this interesting thing of here's this big romance happening, here's this big story happening, but all these little stories are also occurring and they're still vital to the texture of that, and there's still real importance given to them. So it's that weird thing of like, even if you're running from the war or escaping the war, even if you don't have this big huge drama going on, you are still in some part connected to this story. Yeah,
I think that's such a good call out. Obviously Rick's line about baked beans at the end, in terms of them two being, you know, just three small people in all of it. They similar to all of the other people that you're so right to call out that have been like expressly introduced in the story just as like they're in the background, but they're there because of whatever in life led them there. Like the pastry chef, you know, they make a point to be like, he was the number one banker in Amsterdam. He's our pastry chef and his dad's the bellboy. So while it's kind of like a light and almost like comedic line, there is such truth to it's like, yes, all types of people from all types of walks of life have been forced into this crazy situation because of what's going on. And then ultimately Rick, Ilsa, and Laszlo are all also just part of that, right? Like everyone's woven in the same fabric. So just like, what a beautiful movie. What a good call out. See, we did have something more to say other than Chris Pratt as...
Don't take us back. Don't take us back. We got to get away from this.
All right. Well, good job, Academy, on the 16th year of the Oscars. Looking forward to next year when we finally have only 5 total movies.
We made it.
Such a short list. Like, it looks kind of weird to be looking at it, but this is how it's going to be for a long, long time. And our calendars are about to be so much more open. So next year, we have the nominees Double Indemnity, Gaslight, Since You Went Away, Wilson, and then the winner that year, Going My Way. And Abby, your oohs are my oohs because I'm also like, oh, I know a little bit about these two things. I think Wilson, and they've been on my list for a while.
I think it's directed by the same guy who did Song for Bernadette and also a long string of our favorite movies.
I just knew that it was a biopic. So I'm just like, all right, prayers for Abby on that one. But, all right. Well, everyone, thank you for joining us. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, share it with your friends so everyone can argue about our takes on movies. And be sure to join us next time for the 17th Academy Awards.